Welcome once again, everyone, to this second
Hello,
edition.
how are you all doing?
How are you doing, Alex?
I'm not doing too badly. I mean, we've just had some rather interesting technical difficulties again, which hopefully we've fully surmounted and nothing's going to go wrong.
I didn't need to know that.
Well, no, they do. In the interest of transparency, Connor,
Yeah,
we've got to tell the people what's happening, how terrible this can be.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Here we are, episode 2.
yep. Without further ado, I suppose just going to get straight into it. So this is the Oera Linda Book, or a presentation about the Oera Linda Book, or at least it should be. I'm not sure if the hotkeys worked. I think I'm.
It looks like it's worked to me.
It's worked. Okay, that's fine. Okay, there we go. So you can see the Oera Linda Book thing. Yeah, still trying to figure out.
I mean, I can, yes.
On YouTube. You'll be able to see it because I'm screen sharing, but
Yeah, I can't see anything on YouTube. On YouTube, we're still waiting for us.
right. And this isn't showing up, Elena, is it?
There's a lag.
I know that. Well, I know there's a lag, but it probably should have shown up by now. I think it's because I remember whenever we did the test run, the little border around it is red, which I think it should be yellow. I think it changed to yellow. So I think the hotkeys. Don't think they worked last time either. So
Yeah, it's not.
okay, that's fine. We're just gonna have to go to OBS and just do it manually again. We'll get there eventually.
Do it again.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just starting out. It's tech issues. Okay.
Yeah.
So
We'll get this all streamlined soon enough, but it's just at the moment, I mean, we've got 3 or 4 different platforms trying to communicate with each other, it seems, and something's not quite working here, because I'm looking at on the live stream, and I think it's me and Elena waiting.
I'm live.
Elena's live. There's something wrong with the one that you're
Okay.
looking at. Okay.
Okay, it's just my end then. If it's working for you guys, then yeah, don't go with what I'm saying.
Try refreshing.
Me, I have done.
You have done.
Yeah, and it's still. I've done it several times. It just says waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why. Fuck it. I don't care.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah. So let's just get straight into it. So, the Oera Linda Book. Here we are. What is the Oera Linda Book? This is one of the sources that you and I came across about 6 years ago, just when
Something
we were
like
looking
that, yeah.
into all of this, I suppose, more obscure history kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So, the Oera Linda Book, it's basically a manuscript, first turned up in the 1867, and it claims to be ancient history of the Frisians.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for anybody that hasn't read it, it's got a lot of it's got a lot of overlap with history as we usually know it, but the story itself, the events that happen, it's all set basically in like the BC period.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It's got within the text itself, it claims that it's been composed between these dates here, 2194 BC, like, geez, that's a long time ago, and 1296 AD. That's quite a claim for a historical text. So, and this, among other reasons, academics don't take it seriously at all.
Mm.
Now, why is this? Well, I mean, what it basically comes down to is that it is completely at odds with all the other history that we know of. I mean, again, it has a lot of references to the more usual history, but like the events and the historical figures in it, it just has a completely different.
There's a lot of self-insertion of like, well, of course, the ancient Greeks were a great civilized race of people, but we know for truth that they were all Frisians originally. And, you know, the Romans and the Persians and everybody was Frisian because everybody, the whole world comes from Frisia.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, that's basically the assumption of it. And it's like, is that necessarily wrong that, you know, the Frisians are, I suppose... some people have used the term root race, so like just this one group that you know, a lot of other people come from. I will get into that actually because I am going to summarize the whole story. So don't need to summarize it just now. But these are just
whole story. You could do the whole thing because there's quite a lot of content.
I said I'm going to summarize the whole story.
Fair enough.
Well, summarize in a yeah, we'll get to it.
We'll get there.
Just as an introduction, like the person that first brought this text forward was a man called Cornelius over de Linden, and he was apparently the chief superintendent of the royal dockyard at the Helder. So
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yep. So he was Dutch by nationality, but I suppose just for anyone that doesn't know, like the Frisians are like their own ethnic group, and they live in the Netherlands and bits of Germany and also a little bit of Denmark as well. They have their own language, which the Oera Linda Book is written in, and
it's sort of Frisian.
Yeah,
this is a very strange form of Frisian if it's Frisian. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be like this really ancient, you know, form of it, and I suppose that basically the reason why we actually feel that it's worth talking about this is that there are people that really take this seriously. Like they think that this is actually like more accurate as far as history goes compared to what the mainstream interpretation is. So yeah, I just thought we would explore that a little bit. I mean, for example, you know, just this down at the bottom, the Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Wirth, they thought it was legit, so they were well into this kind of stuff. So I suppose the other thing as well is it does have importance for anyone that's into Germanic history and spirituality and stuff like that as well, you know. So it is like, you know, the Frisians are a Germanic people, and yeah, it's supposed to this history is meant to be of you know, Germanic people more widely, not, you know, as
the basic, because they use the term Frisian or Fries or the Frias, I think is what it says in the text. But what they're really talking about is like a kind of pre-Proto-Germanic race that's indigenous to Northern Europe, pretty much. That's what the Frias is supposed to be.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, why consider it? The initial thing that I found quite interesting about it is this idea of Atlant, or Aldland or Atlant. You know, it is Atlantis, and I thought that might be Doggerland. You know, because Doggerland, all those little islands. Let me see if I can get another. Oh yeah, here's the cursor. So Frisia is basically this area here, this coastline, all along Netherlands, Germany, and up into Denmark there. And there used to be a lot more land there. So, and that sank, geologists tell us, round about, I think it was 6,000 BC.
Yeah, about them.
Yeah. So that's when it's dated to, and I'm thinking, when I first came across this, it was like, oh, this is really interesting. It's like it's talking about like this sinking land. Could it be Doggerland? But just straight off the bat, it's not, because in the text itself, it doesn't actually say that Aldland was actually where Frisia was. It's Aldland or Atland is definitely like somewhere far, far away, and it doesn't actually specify where. Kind of implies that it was in Asia, so that's
Does
not...
it? I've read it briefly the other day, and I couldn't. It didn't seem like it was implying anywhere in particular. It was just not where they were.
Yeah. Okay. Well, basically that. Yeah. So it's not. And does it match with what archaeological and archaeogenetic evidence tells us? It's pretty much like no.
Pretty much no. That's a good way of putting it. If you were really, really kind to the Oera Linda book and accepted that maybe it's original and authentic material that has then had like layers of anachronistic kind of storytelling put down on top of it, then you might be able to say, well, I mean, some of this could be legitimate Stone Age memories that have been, kept over that long. But I mean, you'd then be discounting a huge amount of the actual content of the book, I think, at that point, just to keep that the bits that are accurate, that do seem like they might reflect some ancient, pre-farming culture even. I mean, these guys are probably not going to have had... I mean, in the Oera Linda book, they're given as having individual houses with individual yards around them, and they grow crops, and they do all this stuff. They're all fishers. They're all expert sales people, and it's kind of hard to imagine that far back. If we're trying to think, 6,000 BC or something, I don't think people were that good at navigating the seas back then. And this is a predominantly maritime culture, it seems, as far as the text itself depicts.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a bit kind of that. This is why what I would more want to focus on in this text is more like where the inspiration seems to be coming from, the perspectives presented in it, because we're having all of this genetic evidence come up to tell us what happened, and it's just like the story just doesn't match at all. And so on that basis, it's like I don't think, if you're going to be scientific about it or anything like that, or unless you want to dismiss the genetic evidence, which
I've got people who are doing that. I'm currently maybe about to begin communication with hardline Oera Linda book enthusiasts who wantonly throw out all of the genetic stuff because it absolutely contradicts the book.
That's like a religious fundamentalist, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I don't see why you would waste your time, but I mean, I suppose if you're curious...
It's amusing.
Yeah,
for the lulz, Connor, for the lulz.
For the lulz, yeah, fair enough. One thing I do find interesting, though, is like this little bit at the bottom where it talks about this guy, Tony Steele, and that he considered it to reveal the genuine truth about ancient European megalithic culture. So
yeah, I mean, so that would then be we'd then be talking like 5th millennium BC on, right? So that's going to be after the point at which the bulk of Doggerland as a habitable landmass has sunk beneath the waves. So it's kind of weird. It's like you can have your Atland is Doggerland, or you can have this is a record of pre-Indo-European civilization. I've even seen people arguing that this is actually records of bell beakers. And they say, well, look, 2000, what is it, 2194 BC or whatever date they give for the sinking of Atland. That's right around the time that bell beaker comes into Europe, and obviously because they've got this sort of Frisian focus in terms of where they're looking from, they ignore the whole of like corded ware and everything that came before bell beaker, and they just imagine seemingly that it started in the Netherlands and spread everywhere from there. And that this must be the Frias, therefore. Yeah. And it's talked about, and the archaeology is confirming the texts, Connor. If you just forget this bit and you just read only this bit.
Yeah.
The archaeology is confirming the text.
Yes, so, I mean, to be fair, if you don't consider the genetic evidence and consider it purely from an archaeological perspective, there have been archaeologists that have argued Bellbeaker comes from the Netherlands. It just popped up there. That's where it comes from. What we know now is the archaeology is still open to debate because archaeology just is. You know, there's a strong possibility that Bellbeaker actually comes from Iberia. So
I think it probably does, but I think that it then gets modulated through corded ware motifs, which is what I think most archaeologists are saying now.
And for anyone that doesn't know, the corded ware culture in Northern Europe, that's a Proto-Indo-European culture. You know, so that's people that have come from the East, moved into Europe, and it seems as if they picked up Bellbeaker culture in the Netherlands. It had probably made its way up from Iberia and ended up in the Netherlands, and then this Proto-Indo-European people, sort of Western branch, ended up spreading it across Western Europe, and that's where it seems like the Celts and the Romans, other Italic peoples, some of the
that's
Iberians.
the whole Italo-Celtic branch. For people who know their haplogroups, that's all P312 and all of that.
So, without further ado, let's just get into the text. Now, I should say the text itself is not in chronological order, but I've gone through it and basically we'll be going through the story more or less in a chronological order.
Cool.
So, beginning with the creation, I am going to be quoting extensively from the book because I might as well just let it speak for itself.
You might as well, yeah.
Yeah. So, here we have, in the beginning, quote, Ur Alda. I should explain, by the way, just that's basically God. It means, Alda is like eldest, and Ur is like origin, so it's like eldest origin, and that's just God. Ur Alda, who alone is eternal and good, made the beginning. Then commenced time. Time wrought all things, even the earth. The earth bore grass, herbs, and trees, all useful and all noxious animals. All that is good and useful she brought forth by day, and all that is bad and injurious by night. After the 12th Yule feast, which is 12 years, I suppose, she brought forth 3 maidens. Lida, out of fierce heat. Finda, out of strong heat. Freya, out of moderate heat. When the last came into existence, Ur-Alda breathed his spirit upon her in order that men might be bound to him. As soon as they were full grown, they took pleasure and delight in the visions of Ur-Alda. Whatever that means. And this says, hatred found its way among them. I think that's specifically referring to these three Ur maidens. They each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters. At every Yule time, a couple. Thence come all mankind. So I suppose actually this is a multiple origin theory. So it doesn't hold humans to come from one single couple like the Bible. This is like, no, God created 3 separate women, and they are 3 separate races.
Yeah.
Species, if you will.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, not quite, because as we will see, there is the possibility, indeed, for the Frisians, the distinct problem of miscegenation. So they're not quite species.
Yeah. So Lida was black, with hair curled like a lamb's. Her eyes shone like stars and shot out glances like those of a bird of prey. Lida was acute. She could hear snake glide and could smell a fish in the water. Lida was strong and nimble. She could bend a large tree. Yet when she walked, she did not bruise a flower stalk. Lida was violent. Her voice was loud. And when she screamed in anger, every creature quailed. Wonderful Lida. She had no regard for laws. Her actions were governed by her passions. To help the weak, she would kill the strong. And when she had done it, she would weep by their bodies. Poor Lida. She turned grey by her mad behaviour. And at last she died heartbroken by the wickedness of her children. Foolish children, they accused each other of their mother's death. They howled and fought like wolves, and while they did this, the birds devoured the corpse. Who can refrain from tears at such a recital? Do you want to
Tears
call...
of laughter, or
Huh?
tears of laughter, or
Do you
no? But
want...
it's interesting. Like, should we comment yet on the extraordinary racial stereotypes, or should we wait until we've gotten through all three?
That was what I was going to ask you. Let's go through all three first, actually, so we can
go through all three, so that people know, they get the full spread of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
This is meant to be serious mythology and a creation story. Okay, so we've had so far, God made time, which made time, which made the earth, which made plants and things and animals, and eventually made three daughters, Lida, Finda, and Freya, one of whom, Lida, we've just found out is black and curly-haired and wonderful, but noisy and passionate, I think. That's the nice takeaway that we can take from that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And her children don't seem to be terribly smart. Yes, all right.
Finda was yellow.
Straight out, no holds barred, just...
So black, yellow. Lida was black, Finda was yellow, and Finda's hair was like the mane of a horse. She could not bend a tree, but where Lida killed one lion, she killed 10. I suppose maybe the implication was she was just a better hunter, or just... Yeah. Finda was seductive. Her voice was sweeter than any bird's. Her eyes were alluring and enticing, but whoever looked upon them became her slave. Finda was unreasonable. She wrote thousands of laws, but she never obeyed one. She despised the frankness of the good and gave herself up to flatterers. That was her misfortune. Her head was too full, but her heart was too vain. She loved nobody but herself, and she wished that all should love her. False Finda. Honey sweet were her words. But those who trusted them found sorrow. But those who trusted them found sorrow at hand. Selfish Finda. She wished to rule everybody, and her sons were like her. Selfish Finda. She wished to rule everybody. They made their sisters. So Finda's sons made their sisters serve them, and the sons also slew each other for the mastery. Treacherous Finda. One wrong word would irritate her, and the cruelest deeds did not affect her. If she saw a lizard swallow a spider, she shuddered, but if she saw her children kill a Frisian, her bosom swelled with pleasure. Unfortunate Finda. She died in the bloom of her age, and was buried under a costly stone. Pompous inscriptions were written on it, and loud lamentations were heard at it. But in private, not a tear was shed. Despicable people. The laws that Finda established were written on golden tables, but the object for which they were made was never attained. The good laws were abolished, and selfishness instituted bad ones in their place. O Finda, then the earth overflowed with blood, and your children were mown down like grass. Yes, Finda, those were the fruits of your vanity. Look down from your watchstar and weep.
Dark.
Yeah. Freya was white, like the snow at sunrise, and the blue of her eyes vied with the rainbow. Like a rainbow. Beautiful Freya, like the rays of the sun shone the locks of her hair, which were as fine as spiders' webs. Clever Freya. When she opened her lips, the birds ceased to sing and the leaves to quiver. Powerful Freya. At the glance of her eye, the lion lay down at her feet, and the adder withheld his poison. Pure Freya. Her food was honey, and her beverage was dew gathered from the cups of the flowers. Sensible Freya. The first lesson that she taught her children was self-control, and the second was the love of virtue. And when they were grown, she taught them the value of liberty, for she said, "Without liberty, all other virtues serve to make you slaves, and to disgrace your origin." Generous Freya. She never allowed metal to be dug from the earth for her own benefit, but when she did it, it was for the general use. Very socialist. Most happy Freya. Like the starry host in the firmament, her children clustered around her. Wise Freya. When she had seen her children reach the 7th generation, she summoned them all to Fleeland, and she gave them her texts. a text is law written down. And she said, "Let this be your guide, and it can never go ill with you." Exalted Freya, when she had thus spoken, the earth shook like the sea of Uralda. The ground of Fleeland sank beneath her feet. The air was dimmed by tears, and when they looked for their mother, she was already risen to her watching star. Then at length thunder burst from the clouds, and the lightning wrote upon the firmament, "Watch, far-seeing Freya. The land from which she had risen was now a stream, and except her text, all that was in it was overwhelmed." I suppose maybe that sounds a bit like Doggerland. I don't know. Obedient children, when they came to themselves again, they made this high mound and built this citadel upon it. And on the walls they wrote the text, and that everyone should be able to find it. They called the land about it Textland, which is an area in Frisia. Therefore, it shall remain as long as the earth shall be the earth. I want to note as well that it actually says in the book that Freya is... So this creation myth, Freya is supposed to have dictated to her successor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not tooting her own horn at all.
No, but she can't. She's not deceitful at all. You got to understand, Freya is absolutely honest and pure and beautiful inside and outside, and so she can't utter a lie. She only told her successor the truth. Of course,
yeah.
It's there in the. You can read it in the text. It's right there.
Yeah. So I love your comment, Alex, on this.
Wait, what comment? Wait.
Comment on so like yeah. Okay, should we start with Lida, like the
Oh right. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I'd do a kind of general bit of commentary.
Okay.
Well, I mean, obviously we're trying to be kind to blacks here because because Lida's great. Honestly, it's her children that are the problem. It's Lida's great though. She's just poor Lida. She's just not all there, you know. I mean, she's wonderful, but she's missing something. Okay, but Finda is actually like kind of bad. Yeah. You see, so this is why we like Lida. She's okay, and we don't, and you'll see. I think there's some point in some of the because the book's got loads of laws about how Frisians are supposed to treat other people and stuff like that, and it is stuff like, you know, don't cause violence against Lida's kin and Finda's kin. Don't be racist towards blacks or Chinese or whoever it might be. That is a thing that they're trying to get across. In terms of people's actions, in terms of what people do to each other, but in terms of how people are perceiving each other, I mean, clearly, this book is supposed to make people think that it's a God-given fact of the world that black folk with their curly hair and their, I mean, you know, they can like, what was it, rip a tree out of the ground or something and kill lions and stuff, but they're not kind of that smart or something. So yeah, that's that. Yellow folk, which is a wonderful descriptor, that accounts for so many people in our world, doesn't it? Yellow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That woman in the picture,
they're worse.
Yeah,
they're actually kind of vindictive and manipulative, and they try and trick not only other people but each other as well. And it's all this kind of, you know, pomp and circus and circumstance and hierarchy, and you know, they like enslaving each other and other people and stuff like that. So they're really bad. Yellow people are actually bad. And then of course there's white people who are great because we're white. Freya said so.
Yeah. Yeah. Freya's white. She says she's great. We're white.
Yeah, what's not to believe? She's white. If she's great, if she says it, it must be true.
Now, to be fair to the book, it's as we get further along in the story, we will find that there are definitely exceptions to this. So
it's not as hammy as it's when you're reading it for the first time through, and you get to these bits, and you're suddenly reading Lida was black, Finda was yellow, and Freya was white. And you're like, oh my god, okay, we're at this level then. And you're really feeling the sense of like, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be some kind of, you know, somebody's playing a prank on someone with this. Nobody could honestly believe this. Even back then, it's too much. But no, you're right. There are points where there are Freyas so Freya's children or descendants who don't act well, and they mess things up for other people. And then there's other people from other kin groups who are actually more like what free as children are supposed to be like, I guess. It's kind of, you know, they have honor and proper respect for each other and other people and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not as black and white as you would think from reading this first sort of creation bit, but it also kind of is.
Don't you mean black and white and yellow?
And yellow, exactly. We've got the yellow, yeah.
I have to say though, like, just some of the stuff, like there's the stereotypes are funny. There's a bit later on, like some Frisian sailor lands in Libya, and the people there are black in this. Now I know that modern day Libyans would probably take a lot of exception to that because they're not black, by most people's standards. And it just says like, oh, he showed up in Libya. There were black people, but he had to sail away because they wanted to eat him. And it's like, to be, yeah.
Oh wow.
Now to be absolutely fair, it's like there is truth behind this in the sense that there have been parts of the world, not necessarily sub-Saharan Africa. I'm thinking actually more like the South Pacific, where
Papua New Guinea,
yeah, like the people they're black-skinned, although actually they've found through genetics and stuff like that despite how dark some of these people in like the South Pacific can be, they're generally more part of the East Asian group. They're not they're not really at all related to Africans. Even though you look at some of these people, sometimes they're called negritos, and they look really similar to black people. But genetically, no, they're more like Asians. They're more like Finda's folk. But again, it's like before we had all the genetic science, you know, it would be a probably reasonable assumption to assume that the Negrito people of the South Pacific and so on were more or are more related to sub-Saharan Africans because they do look more similar. But yeah, turns out they're actually not. But
they're actually not. Yeah.
But yeah, no. I mean, can we be honest and say it's like there's truth behind these stereotypes, and that's not to kind of like I'm not defending I would consider this pretty racist, right? You know, just in a general sense.
Is there truth behind these stereotypes? I mean, I might grant it if you say that like there's warped truth behind these stereotypes. It's at least 2 degrees removed because you've got the truth, which is. I'm sorry, I'll let you go. I'll let you go.
I'll just give you a few examples. Just just throwing things out there as just like vague sort of inspirations. It's like, well, I've just said like there are some dark-skinned tribes across the world that were cannibals. You know.
I mean, I'm gonna bookend that by saying that there were presumably white-skinned tribes way back when that were cannibals. Because cannibalism seems to have been a factor in a lot of different cultures for a lot of different reasons as well. It's not always sort of headhunting, eating my enemy kind of thing. Sometimes it's eating my friends.
Yeah.
So I take a little bit of them with me,
but did they know that in the 19th century, or did they only have?
No, this is the thing. This is where we start drawing some rather severe doubt on the origin of this particular text, because they did not know this in the 19th century, and conceivably they might actually have known better in the 2nd millennium BC.
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't have known all that much about black people in the 2nd millennium BC. I don't think Europeans really knew much about that.
Yeah, the sources that we have show that it's like, they really didn't. And funnily enough, actually, like in the Middle Ages, like black people were associated with like trolls and the devil and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
the beat and
so there was a kind of like, they had almost like a mythical kind of folkloric kind of aura about them.
Yeah.
But again, from the Oera Linda textbook, that would be seen as probably like a degeneration rather than like the original kind of.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, they knew much better, much further back. But
their knowledge was much closer to our modern knowledge, much further back. Mysterious.
Yeah. But so as far as Finda and Freya go, I mean, Finda, all the stuff about like ridiculous like laws and arbitrary. I mean, it just makes me think of Qin Shi Huangdi, the first where we get the name China from. So it has to be admitted, I suppose, as far as China goes, like as a country, as a culture, they do have this very sort of strong bureaucratic thing going on at various points in their history. Like, it is
they're obsessed with law. Yes.
Yeah, Qin Shi Huangdi. I mean, like he's not remembered well by certain Chinese people, like throughout history. Like, they were like he burnt a bunch of books by, I think, Confucius or something like that. Like, he was remembered as just like, no, just get rid of all this philosophy crap. We're just laws and stuff like that. That's not the only perspective that people have on him, but it's like, you know, this is what I mean about, like, there is a basis for these stereotypes presented here in, you know, real cultures, like in this sense. And as far as like Freya goes and liberty and stuff like that, it's like, well, where does liberalism come from? You know? Yeah,
it's a fair point. It is a fair point. And I'd say the obsession with liberty and freedom, even, you know, to like a bad end result, is also quite a European thing, maybe. That, you know, we can have this tendency of going so hard on the libertarian side of things that we then have really bad time with like law and order and stuff like that, compared to some other peoples. So, yeah.
But again,
okay, I grant it. There is some measure of truth underneath it. I just think that it's obviously so heavily caricaturized, and there's not really enough room given, obviously, for the fact that all of these traits are found in all of these different peoples. Yeah. It's never a case of one race having wholesale this attribute nobody else does, apart from, I guess, like skin or something like that, right?
Yeah. But again, the things that I've just said, so like these real world examples, you can find various points way back in history where, like, the stereotype, like, you know, there were white skinned cannibals, there were, like, you know, Asian, like East Asian or whatever, you know, people that were really into freedom and stuff like that. It's like, specifically in the 19th century, it tended to be white people were into liberty. A lot of the Asian countries had these very traditional and bureaucratic kind of structures, and where the darker people lived, they tended to be more primitive and tribal.
Or some of the stories I've read coming out of the late 19th century about what white people were encountering in Africa is absolutely horrific. Yeah. Like, Heart of Darkness. It's Heart of Darkness. It's mad. It's madness on a kind of cultural level. But yeah, so I can see that. I can well see it. It just then, you know, those perspectives born forth in this text date it, because those are 19th century perspectives. Yeah. When was it found again, Connor? 1867?
Yeah. I will finish off with a quote from Mino, who did you know that King Minos was Frisian? Of course.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
He says, "In my youth, I often grumbled at the strictness of the laws." I suppose that's one thing to emphasize, is that both Finda and Freya's folk are well into laws. It's just that Freya's actually obey them, and Finda's just write them because...
And Freya's laws are about upholding and maintaining freedom, whereas Finda's laws are more about obeisance to a higher power.
Yeah. But afterwards I learned to thank Freya for her texts, and our forefathers for the laws which they established upon it. Ur Alda, or Olvadr, has given me many years, and I have travelled over many lands and seas, and after all that I have seen, I am convinced that we alone are chosen by Olvadr. Oh, chosen people. Okay, that's funny. We alone are chosen by Olvadr to have laws. Lida's people can neither make laws nor obey them. They are too stupid and uncivilized. Many are like Finda. They are clever enough, but they are too rapacious, haughty, false, immoral, and bloodthirsty. The toad blows himself out, but he can only crawl. The frog cries, "Work, work," but he can do nothing but hop and make himself ridiculous. The raven cries, "Spare, spare," but he steals and wastes everything that he gets into his beak. Finda's folk are just like these. They say a great deal about making good laws, and everyone wishes to make regulations against misconduct, but does not wish to submit to them himself. Whoever is the most crafty crows over the others and tries to make them submit to him, till another comes who drives him off his perch. So yeah, again, it's
So
just...
not only was Minos a Frisian, he was also a racist.
yeah, like really hardcore, like fuck it, especially against Finda's folk. Like, geez,
I know. Well, I mean, to be fair, if he's in Crete, then he must be right next to a whole load of Finda. It must be Finda's folk in the Near East and in the Middle East. I'm guessing. I mean, they're not white, so.
Okay, so I'll just briefly mention like the Middle Eastern people, Phoenicians. They're like a mix between all three of these.
Yeah,
so they're just mongrel race, which again, people have tended to assume that in the past about people in the Middle East, but actually, Middle Eastern, North African, and European people, they all form like this broad West Eurasian cluster with each other. Europeans are obviously more to one side of the spectrum, and then Middle Eastern and North Africans are more to another. North Africans have a little bit of input from the sub-Saharan kind of thing, but broadly speaking, you know, there's Europeans and Middle Eastern people have more in common with each other, and then you've got everybody else kind of to the south and in the east and stuff. So, but yeah, that's what they thought. They looked at Middle Eastern people. They're like, oh, you are all like, you know, mixed up.
These are sort of intermediate people. They must be a mixture of everyone.
I mean, they look a bit like that's what they are, and they are to some extent. Like, there is a little bit of gene flow coming from East Asia. You know, like the Turks and then Sub-Saharan Africa. It's, you know, there's a little bit out from, but no, they really are actually genetically more like Europeans than anyone else. So, which I think a lot of Europeans like might find that a bit uncomfortable, but again, that's
it's always the thing. It's like you hate your neighbor more than you hate the guy who lives way off over there, because you don't fight the guy who lives way off over there. You only fight your neighbor.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, culturally speaking, I do think that Europe and the Middle East are miles apart.
Oh yeah.
But of course, that's another thing.
Spiritually, there's a distinct difference, I think.
This is a theme that will probably come up again and again in Northern Horde's productions. Is this kind of like genetics does not equal culture? Like,
no, it doesn't.
Genetics can carry culture, but it's like the cultural expression is like they're almost like there is overlap, but they're too many people, I suppose, especially like that are into, you know, how should I put that? Well, yeah,
just racism.
Basically, if you're a racist, you think that they're basically the same thing, and it's like, well, they're not. But yeah,
no. And the thing as well that's interesting about it is that it's a matter of experience to just meet enough people of enough backgrounds to realize that genes doesn't dictate shit by itself.
Yeah.
It really requires the surrounding culture to say whether those genes are going to express in a way that's good for everybody or not good for everybody, right? Or in what, how you're going to tough it up one way or another.
Okay, next.
Should we keep going?
Yeah. I literally just clicked it as you said. So yeah.
Sorry, there's a lag for me, so I don't get to see it until about 5-10 seconds after you've clicked.
So this is just a background to the world of the Oera Linda book, the kind of society and stuff like that. So before 2194 BC, Frisia is a paradise. So I'll read to you just a little bit about this story of before the bad time came and then the bad time. Before the bad time came, our country was the most beautiful in the world. The sun rose higher and there was seldom frost. The trees and shrubs produced various fruits, which are now lost. In the fields, we had not only barley, oats and rye, but wheat, which shone like gold, and which could be baked in the sun's rays. How convenient. The years were not counted, for one was as happy as the other. Also very convenient. It's just history starts. Yeah, before that, so that's basically prehistory. And they're farming, so maybe that's kind of Neolithic. No? On one side, we were bounded by Uraldus Sea, on which no one but us might or could sail. So the North Sea, I guess. Or the Atlantic, I'm not completely sure. On the other side, we were hedged in by the broad Tyskland, this is Germany, through which Finda's people dared not come on account of the thick forests and wild beasts. Britain was the land of the exiles, who with the help of
I remember this now. Yeah.
yeah, who with the help of their Burgmagd, which is a sorry, I need to
Town mother, something like that.
Yeah,
Is that a direct translation? Yeah.
I'll need to diverge from the just because it's given this reference. I'm going to diverge from the quote and just explain a little bit about this stuff written at the bottom about Frisian society. It's matriarchal, which that's interesting in itself. Is just like Gimbatas, eat your heart out kind of stuff.
I was gonna go on to that at a later point. Yeah.
I think we can do. I suppose.
Just briefly, let's finish this bit off for now.
Yeah. So, well, essentially, just to give you an idea of how the society is structured, the leader is called Volksmutter, the mother of the people, and she is one of the Burgtmagden, who are they themselves are like the leaders of the boroughs or towns or whatever, and they are virgin priestesses who tend holy fires. So they're basically like the Vestal Virgins, and so it says of the Britons, with the help of their Burgmagd, so they were basically Frisians who were exiled, but they were able to go to Britain. It's like, oh, you've done goofed here in Frisia.
In Frisia, yeah.
But yeah, you can just.
We're going to brand you, wasn't it? Didn't they get branded?
Yeah,
and
with
like,
a B
it's red if they're a murderer, and and blue if they're another criminal. Fuck.
It says the banished with a red dye, the other criminals with blue. Now, what's interesting about the red and blue thing is that in classical references, and we're finding a lot of classical references in this text. Yeah. Julius Caesar obviously famously describes the Briton as wearing blue markings, probably tattoos, woad or some other thing, and there's a couple of other historians. I think Jordanes describes the Picts as wearing red tattoos. So
right, okay.
So I noticed that.
I didn't know that from Jordanes. That's interesting.
Yeah. Jordanes. Oh, I think the earliest source to. Oh yeah, he specifically says. I think he's the first to say specifically they make their tattoos with red dye. So yeah, that's everything's great. But then in 2194 BC, during the whole summer, the sun had been hid behind the clouds, as if unwilling to look upon the earth. There was perpetual calm, and the damp mist hung like a wet sail over the houses and the marshes. The air was heavy and oppressive, and in men's heart was neither joy nor cheerfulness. In the midst of this stillness, the earth began to tremble as if she was dying. The mountains opened to vomit forth fire and flames. Through the fire I carry on. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
Some sank into the bosom of the earth, and in other places mountains rose out of the plain. Aldland, called by the seafaring people Atland, disappeared, and the wild waves rose so high over hill and dale that everything was buried in the sea. Many people were swallowed up by the earth, and others who had escaped the fire perished in the water. It was not only in Finda's land that the earth vomited fire, but also in Twiskland, Germany. Whole forests were burned one after another, and when the wind blew from that quarter, our land was covered with ashes. Rivers changed their course, and at their mouths new islands were formed of sand and drift. Which is, I suppose that is Frisia. So, during 3 years this continued, but at length it ceased, and the forests became visible. Many countries were submerged, and in other places land rose above the sea, and the wood was destroyed through the half of Twiskland. Troops of Finda's people came and settled in the empty places. Our dispersed people were exterminated or made slaves. Then watchfulness was doubly impressed upon us, and time taught us that union is force. Okay, fair enough, actually. So it's Aldland itself is not here, but there is still a catastrophe, and it does. I mean, it does sound like it's as Doggerland. Now, obviously, Doggerland's sinking is dated to 6000 BC. This is 2194 BC, and according to radiocarbon dating, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, like you said, 2194 BC. That's like early Bronze Age kind of time. So
Yeah.
it's like it doesn't sync up at all. But I mean, yeah, of course it doesn't.
Of course it doesn't.
Yeah. I'm actually saying that in the sense of like, we've questioned chronology before, so the chronology I'm not going to focus so heavily on in terms of like how it might not match up. But I will point out that on Wikipedia it says that Aldland was supposedly submerged in 2194 BC, the same year as 19th century Dutch and Frisian almanacs, following traditional biblical chronology, gave for Noah's flood. So,
yeah.
So the creation myth is a lot like the Bible, except it's much less patriarchal.
It's pagan.
You know,
right? Isn't it just a sort of a strange sort of inversion of the Christian Bible or the Abrahamic Genesis?
I mean, the term pagan for the Oera Linda book is kind of interesting, and once we get a little bit further along here, because I don't know if pagan is even the right term for this, but yeah, it is more like just an inversion of the Bible. So that means it's satanic.
If you want, unless the Bible's satanic.
Yeah, no, this is the real Bible. The Bible that everybody knows and loves or hates.
The Jewish Bible's a fake. It's a rip-off. Oralda's holy word got corrupted and turned into this. That's why they say they're the chosen people, because they want to be the Fries.
Yep.
They're not.
Yep. So now also as well, like the Oera Linda book, it mentions in this pre-flood period they're using copper and iron, which is the bit that I think when we were originally going through this years back, the iron was one of the bits where we were like, hang on a minute, what? Because this either means that we have to completely reevaluate the use of iron over time, and there's some room for doing that because iron obviously rusts. So it could just be that there's like really ancient iron lying all over the place that people were using 5,000, 6,000 years ago, whatever, but we can't tell because it's all rusted away, you know. But that also seems really unlikely because you kind of need certain technologies. It was like we were saying the other day about flamenco going from stone to steel. You need certain technologies before you start doing certain things, and I think smelting in principle will probably come in before iron, right? Wow. Again, I will point out actually in the Toynbee Cooley, which in English is called the Cattle Raid of Cooley, they've historians have noted, like reading the texts, that the Toyn is set in depends, like some people say round about the birth of Christ, other people will be like, it's more like the 4th century AD. Doesn't matter, like it's Iron Age, it's like late Iron Age Ireland, right? But the description of the weapons and everything are really Viking Age, you know, big ass swords and things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And that's when the earliest copies of the Toyn were written. So it does seem as if
it's anachronism. The story form is maybe the same and legitimate, but you know, the specific descriptions of objects, items, and even maybe like, you know, institutions, like, you know, say in the Viking time there's an Ard Ri, there's a High King, and maybe there wasn't beforehand, but now they have this whole thing about, and then the Ard Ri said blah 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 blah. Actually, in the original story, it was just a really big local guy, not a chief of the whole of Ireland, let's say. But it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, this isn't the weakest point in this text in terms of its potential legitimacy on that basis. But yeah. Moving on. 101 years after the submersion of Aldland, which was in 2093 BC, a people came out of the east. They were not wild people, like most of Finda's race, but like the Egyptians, they have priests and also statues in their churches. The priests are the only rulers. They call themselves Magyars, and their headman, Magi. He is high priest and king in one. The rest of the people are of no account and in subjection to them. This people have not even a name, but we call them Finns, because although all their festivals are melancholy and bloody, they are so formal that we are inferior to them in that respect. But still, they are not to be envied, because they are slaves to their priests, and still more to their creeds. They believe that evil spirits abound everywhere and enter into men and beasts. But of Uralda's spirit they know nothing. They have weapons of stone, the Magyars of copper. The Magyars affirm that they can exorcise and recall the evil spirits, and this frightens the people so that you never see a cheerful face. So...
Dark.
For some reason, the Oera Linda Book really, really doesn't like Finnic people. Like,
I've not understood this.
Yeah.
We've looked into this on and off over 6 years, and I still can't get my head around why do 19th century Frisians not like Finnish people? What's the problem? What are the Finns doing in Frisia?
yeah, this is a really weird point. I mean, I'm honestly wondering if it's just like, just for the sake of having an attack. To be honest, actually, I think I might
Why
know what
couldn't they have chosen the French?
Well, I'll get to them.
They're not British, that's why. Gotcha. Okay.
The sense that I get from this, like, I mean, this stuff about the type of society that's being described, that does sound a lot like Sami or Siberian shamans. You know, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah.
It's
I don't know about everybody being subjugated to the law of one man thing.
I think that I remember there was a reference. It was Terence McKenna was talking about this with the Amanita muscaria mushroom,
Right.
and the fact that some of these Siberian tribes use it. And the one thing that stood out to me that he said is that in the east of Siberia, you know, everybody just takes these mushrooms and, you know, has a good time with them. But apparently in Western Siberia, traditionally it was this thing of like, oh, the shamans had, you know, they were the only ones taking this mushroom. They were the only ones that were allowed to take it, you know, and everybody else had to drink their piss, you know, which had the chemicals.
That's interesting because people have pointed out that apparently the piss filters out. It's filtered out some of the stuff that you don't want, some of the stuff that can make it an uncomfortable experience. Has been processed by that point. So it's actually better for people to be drinking the shaman's piss than to be having the straight mushroom.
Yeah, pretty much. But you could potentially see in this a certain power dynamic.
Okay.
And I think now this is a theme that will come up a lot in this book. Is like whoever wrote this does not like priests of any type.
Yeah. I mean, it opens up the. Sorry, I mean, we're skipping ahead chronologically and way back in terms of the actual structure of the book, but isn't the first letter something like, never let this text fall into the hands of a papist?
A monk specifically, yeah.
Monks, okay, that was it. I thought it was like Catholics. They hated Catholics or something like that.
It would be Catholics because that's...
that's a fair point. You don't really get Protestant monks, do you?
No, you don't. No, that's the whole point, is they don't have monks, so... monks, priests, like any of these type of people, just no. Just these people. Now, again, there are exceptions.
No priests, only Bergmarks.
Yeah. So, like, these... Yeah, priestesses is fine, but priests...
That's fine, because it's a woman, yeah. But not a male. No priest. That's like a Maggie, and he's going to try and create horrible laws that he's not going to follow, and then, you know, he's going to subjugate people, and it's going to be bad.
This actually, that didn't click with me before, Alex, for some reason. But yeah, you're right. It's like, that's interesting, the idea. It's like, when women do the priest thing, it's good, it's okay. But when men do it, that's ergy, I don't know.
Yeah, I've also noticed that while saying that, like the whole sequestering of, you know, valuable goods and stuff, and, you know, the my word is the divine word and all that. That kind of is a bit like Catholicism. So the Finns in this, the Finder's kin are kind of being depicted as if that's the root, racially, as far as modern Europeans are supposed to be concerned, of you know, things like Catholic, like church tithes and all of the kind of, you know, all the stuff that Protestants don't like.
Yeah.
What I really noticed reading through some of it this time around was like, this is really puritanical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Netherlands, 19th century.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what I want to point out as well with the Finns is just how they relate to the Norse in the Oera Linda book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the story is basically, so you have the Finns. They show up. They're from Aldland, apparently, Atlantis. That's where they come from, and they're Finda's folk. It is specified, for example, Kashmir is in Finda's land, so Finda's land is Asia. So they come from Asia. I'll get more specifically into that in the next few slides. But point is, they come into Finland. There's not many people living there, so that's how they can settle. Which, actually, that's kind of what happened in real life. It's like, yeah, I suppose there was some hunter gatherers about, but it's like,
Yeah.
I've noticed this with like a lot of these Uralic people, as they're called, like the broad Finno-Ugric and Samoyedic groups. Like they tend to live way up in the far north where nobody else lives, and I honestly think it's a survival strategy. Just like, okay,
It's a smart strategy, man. They're still here.
yeah, but it's basically the idea is like, as long as you can survive nature, you don't have to deal with that many other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of worked until the modern period when you had to deal with modern Scandinavians and Russians, and they're quite difficult to deal with if you're like quite a primitive tundra dwelling folk.
Yeah.
So anyway, they start fighting basically with the Scandinavians, and eventually there's one Frisian who's born called Woden. This is obviously Odin.
Woden. Yeah.
Woden. And he's actually a bit of a retard. Like,
Yeah, this is the point. This is the first reading that I did going through this. This is the point where I just turned off completely. I'd stomached the whole, oh yes, the British are exiles bit.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine. I take one on the chin there. But no, as soon as you start bad mouthing Odin, I'm like, nah, this is wrong. This is bad.
yeah, he basically gets tricked by Maggie, the leader of the Finns, into becoming their king. And there's also an interesting bit where it says that Woden attacks savage horsemen, and they were the ones who had initially.
Is it like the Finns are getting chased out of Asia by all these savage horsemen have come up? So yeah, and it's starting to look like, oh, okay, is this the kind of, there's the Pontic Caspian steppe Yamnaya pushing some sort of forest steppe guys up into funnel beaker territory, and the conflict's happening there? No, it's probably not. But that's kind of where coming from the background we were coming at it from. That was sort of where our minds were going. I think was trying to work out what population groups could be. Okay, savage horse people. That's got to be Indo-Europeans.
Yeah. Or just Turks, Tatars, that kind of people. Yeah. So there's a general theme, but like we'll suppose get to that a bit more. But I mean, Woden doesn't end up. It doesn't end up well out of this. It says when Woden returned, Maggie gave him his daughter to wife, whereupon he was incensed with herbs. But they were magic herbs, and by degrees he became so audacious that he dared to disavow and ridicule the spirits of Freya and Uralda, while he bent his free head before the false and deceitful images, or idols. That's also pretty puritanical. It's like, okay, we don't like pagan idolatry. It's like, so the Oera Linda Book is not pagan in that sense, but
yeah, that's very correct.
His reign lasted 7 years, and then he disappeared. To be fair, Odin does that a lot. He's around, and then he buggers off, and you don't see him for a while. The Magi said that he was taken up by their gods and still reigned over us, but our people, the Frisians, laughed at what they said, because we don't believe that men can be made and can become god, except for Freya.
Only women can be made into stars to watch over everybody. Come on. Don't you know your lord? Didn't you read Freya's text?
To be fair, it's there's a reference later on where they talk about and it's literally it's only Freya that is divinized, is allowed to be divinized. She is definitely divinized. It literally says that she is worshipped. And what's interesting in terms of the name is that Freya is just the Frisian version of Frigg. who in Norse mythology is Odin's wife. So,
yeah, there's disagreement about this, Connor. That
Sure.
some of the pro Oera Linda book people who take it to be legitimate really strongly argue that it is Freya specifically. I think because Frigg is Odin's wife, and these guys are more of the kind of Valnic persuasion, maybe.
okay.
I'm telling you, I've literally read people make
Yeah,
that
yeah.
argument in the past couple of days, and I think, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That's not a sound argument, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the place to get into the Frigg Freya debate. Not going to go there. But I will point out this little bit at the bottom that the Finns apparently had a god called Thur, and it's like it's like Thor. It's the only thing I could think of that it would.
Yeah.
Okay, and this bit's interesting just about like how advanced they are. Like they're so advanced and their rituals are so formal that it's like, you know, that even the Frisians struggle to understand them, and they have temples and idols and all this kind of stuff. But
Yeah, that bit's a little bit kind of. It strikes me a lot like some of the adventure fiction that you might get. Not maybe from a bit after that time, but you think like Robert Howard kind of stuff in like strange civilizations in the wild parts of the world that have these mysterious temples and incredible rituals, and it's all like, wow, you know, otherworldly and exotic and kind of surprising even. That's what it struck me like. It's like, yeah, odd.
But okay, so now I can get on to maybe the truth behind the Finns kind of stuff. So the picture on the right is an example of a giant's church. And this is dated to the comb ceramic culture period. So it's between 4200 and 2000 BC. And this is standard archaeology kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if whoever wrote this might have known about these giant's churches, possibly. Like, it was these big stone buildings. Nobody knows actually what they were for, like whether they were just houses or whatever, but they're Neolithic. And when I say Neolithic, I mean like because they have pottery. They're not farming. These are hunter-gatherers, you know, building these stone buildings. So that, like, they're pretty mysterious. Archaeologists are at a loss to actually say what they were for. Apparently they struggle to get enough evidence from the sites themselves to be sure. So that's kind of interesting. And as far as the genetics go, you know, these pottery styles, they do seem, the pottery seems to have been brought from China, because, just skipping into the next slide, haplogroups, autosomal stuff. Yeah, we get into the genetics a little bit. It is basically a fact that the Finns, the Sami, at least the men, like the paternal lineages of these people, that they come from China. Like the earliest examples of haplogroup N, and even specifically N1A, which is what you get in northeast or just like the northern Siberia and Finland and stuff. The first samples, I think it's the Tat subclade, show up in Neolithic China. So honestly, it does. This is one of those things that's quite interesting because it's people have known about this for a long time. Like, even before the genetic evidence came out, it's like they could tell that Finnic people have Asian genes. And I suppose, yeah, you can see that with in terms of relation to East Asians, it's like most of it in Europe is up in those like Finnic kind of areas.
Yeah.
And that's because a lot of the men have haplogroup N1A1.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about it, though, is that they're still more European than anything else. It's just that they seem to have this big paternal input from this group of Neolithic Chinese people. And that's why they're Asian. And I think maybe that is, if whoever wrote the Oera Linda book was maybe reading the accounts of like Sami or Siberian shamans, you know, maybe picking up on that, like, yeah, this very non-European kind of thing from them. And that's maybe what they didn't like about it, is like, oh, this is racially foreign, like, I don't like this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's maybe what they were picking up on more than it being like evil or something like that. They were just like, oh, this is not my people's thing.
Yeah, although I think just I think if they'd have read about the shamans, they would just be like, oh, that's priests. They must be evil because they're priests, you know, and
Fair,
like
yeah.
because shamans are so important traditionally in these kind of societies. So I'll just go through this, just a bit of fun, like some phenotypes that you get in these parts, and people that I think,
Phenotypes.
yeah, the people that do look a bit Asian, like in this part
Yeah,
of
sure.
Europe. Yeah. So here's
We
one.
get the fold thing. I mean, we get it over here in the British Isles, but for different reasons, it seems. But it doesn't look as sort of Asian somehow, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas with some Eastern Europeans, and especially with like Finns and is it Latvians, I can't remember, Estonians,
Yeah.
some of them have got, they're very European looking, but they've got really Asiatic European features.
Yeah. So I mean, this idea about the Finns being Asian, like Finnish folk, it is legit. You know, it's basically a fact. It's just I suppose whoever wrote the Oera Linda book has chosen to make this mean that they're therefore antagonists. So
Yeah.
so there's, you know, a couple of examples. For some reason, I don't know why, this one's scandolapid. You tend to apparently it's very very rare compared to the other two I've just shown, but for some reason there's some in Brittany and the Basque country. I don't know what that's about. It's a bit random, but yeah. Anyway, so on to the next group. So the French, basically.
Oh yeah, of course. I forgot about all this. This is like Katla or Kalta, whatever she's called, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Near the southern mouth of the Rhine and the Scheldt, there are 7 islands, named after Freya's 7 virgins of the week. In the middle of one island is the city of Walhalla-Gara, which is modern-day Middelburg in the area of Walcheren. So I suppose that it's interesting how you find these references to Norse mythology, like Valhalla and Woden and stuff like that, and it's kind of selective. So like
At one point, there's something about Uralda putting his ode into Freya or something like that, or into the daughters so that they can have children. And it's specifically the term used in the Frisian, if it is Old Frisian, is ode or odem or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's this interesting thing of like I think Karl Maria Willigut as well, for anybody that knows who that is. That was Himmler's. So the Oera Linda book was Himmler's Bible. Karl Maria Willigut was Himmler's guru. He was also a bit like this. Like he called his doctrine Christianism, and he claimed that the original Germanic religion was a form of Christianity, and that the kind of the Eddas and this kind of Norse pagan stuff that comes down to us from the Middle Ages is like a degeneration, and it's influenced by the Romans and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
So yeah, this is a thing that seems to have been the case in the sort of 19th and early 20th centuries. Is like these basically Germanic Christians that were really into. They seem to have been. They were really into the Germanic thing, but they didn't like paganism. So
It's very strange because as well, if you're thinking like Willigut and okay, so Himmler, Nazis, the SS and everything, who do we hate? Juden. Why do we hate them? All sorts of reasons. But which one do we not hate? Jesus. Or we do, but we don't. But you see what I mean? Like why Christian when Christianity is an offshoot, it's a sect of Judaism.
yeah, well,
It's never ever made sense to me.
I'm just going to say one thing because the Egyptians, and I'm going to leave it at that, and we're gonna
Beautiful. I love it.
Going to talk about that some other time. That Christianity and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm going to say it's like Egyptians. So continuing with this bit. So 563 years after the submersion of Atlant, that is 1600 BC, although apparently it's actually 1630, whatever. So a wise town priestess presided there at Middelburg, whose name was Minerva. Called by the
Of course, don't you know? All the Greek gods and goddesses are Frisians.
Yeah. Just to be specific, that's her Latin name, but it's Athena,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But she was called by the sailors Nehelenia, and Nehelenia was a Germanic goddess worshipped within the Roman parts of like the Netherlands and Germany. On the other side of the Scheldt, at Vliebert, Sigrid presided. This maiden was full of tricks. Her face was beautiful and her tongue was nimble, but the advice that she gave was always conveyed in mysterious terms. Therefore, the mariners called her Culta, and the landsmen thought it was a title. In the last will of the dead mother, that's the Volksmother, they just call her the mother most of the time. Rosamond was named first, Minerva second, and Sigrid third in succession. Minerva did not mind that, being second, but Sigrid was very much offended, being third. Like a foreign princess, she wished to be honoured, feared, and worshipped, but Minerva only desired to be loved. At last, all the sailors, even from Denmark and Flimir, did homage to her. This hurt Sigrid because she wanted to excel Minerva. In order to give an impression of her great watchfulness, she had a cock put on her banner. So then Minerva went and put a sheepdog and an owl on her banner. The dog, she said, guards his master and his flock, and the owl watches that the mice shall not devastate the fields. But the cock, in his lewdness and in his pride, is only fit to murder his nearest relations. When Calta found that her scheme had failed, she was still more vexed. So she secretly sent for the Magyars to teach her conjuring. When she had enough of this, she threw herself into the hands of the Gauls. So, a couple of things to mention about Calta specifically. The thing about the cock being used as the emblem. So
Yeah, that's the Gauls, the chickens, right?
Yep, and still the emblem of France to this day. The other interesting thing about this is that there's no indication that Calta has any that she's got any foreign blood or anything like that. She just seems to be a bad Frisian. So
yeah, pretty much.
So there's one example of yes, the Frisians are not all perfect. You know, they're not completely infallible. I mean, Freya was obviously, but
of course.
But her children, they're fallible, and this is one example. And what she basically goes and does is, and this is where these. I've talked about her and then nothing about all of this stuff to do with who the Gauls actually were, because that's kind of interesting. So apparently there's this Phoenician sailor called Turnus, and he explores the Mediterranean and ends up trading with the Phoenicians, and they love his all the Frisian stuff, the iron weapons and gold and all that kind of stuff. They love it so much, they're like, oh my god, we need more of this. The hand rubbing intensifies, and and they want this, so they decide to buy Marseille from the Frisians, because Gaul is not there's not many people live there, so they don't care. And the name Gauls Gaul is supposed to come from Gola or Gola, who are described as missionary priests of Sidon, a Phoenician city, and the Frisian sailors call them Triuvenden, which is abstainers of truth, which is apparently the root of druid. Now,
yeah, because adding an N in there changes it from witten, as in knowing, to wenden, as in going, away from.
Yeah.
That's, you want to fuck around with words that much, you can.
There's a lot of that in the Oera Linda book, by the way, because, I mean, another example here is Marseille, the original Greek word is Massalia, but in the Oera Linda book, they call it Missalia, which means mistake, because it was it was a mistake to sell this place to these people, So, so this is interesting that they have these these Phoenician. Okay, so these Phoenicians come and they settle, and I suppose
This is in the 17th century BC. Am I right?
yeah.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
wondering, are we too early for Phoenicians yet, or is this the right kind of time? We're too early for Phoenicians to be getting Marseille, surely.
The Phoenicians didn't even. I mean, okay, I'm gonna.
Well, okay, you know when people say the Phoenicians took like Greece and Italy and Marseille and Tartessus or whatever it is, and blah 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 blah. But that kind of exodus from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Western Mediterranean, that should properly be associated with the Bronze Age collapse, shouldn't it? So
Yeah.
we're roughly 400 or 500 years now further back than we should. Yeah.
Let's leave the chronology aside at the moment.
Okay.
I want to point out this map here. Now,
Yeah.
now Massalia was founded as a Greek colony, but what's interesting is you see the little arrows there. So the red is the Greeks and the purple is the Phoenicians, and there's it seems like a Phoenician movement from Sardinia to Marseille. So
Yeah.
and then there's also they're also going up to Britain as well. That's the tin mining. So Cadiz, the Phoenician city, is right at the very southern tip of Spain on the Atlantic coast rather than the Mediterranean. So that specific group of Phoenicians wanted the monopoly on Atlantic tin trade. So that's why they settled there. This part is interesting because so I gave the example of the Finns, and there's definitely evidence that at some point, it seems probably during the Neolithic, a group of Chinese people moved in, or Siberians really, and you know that they mainly through the paternal lines, you know, they gave rise to the Finno-Ugric people, right? This stuff about the Phoenicians is interesting because, well, you know, you were just saying to me the other day about like, I mean, I talked about this as well in the last our first stream about this idea about Middle Eastern influence coming to the Atlantic, you know.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about it is like we've looked quite extensively. We've got a decent amount of genetic evidence now to, you know, make pretty firm statements on this. And what it seems is that there really, like in terms of like racial genetic input, there really wasn't that much being added to like the Celtic people that were already living there by Phoenicians or anything like that. It's like it yeah, I mean obviously it's got like the Phoenicians, they're going to Marseille, which means they would have interacted with presumably some Celts, and they're going up to Britain, you know, so they would have interacted with the Celts there, or Britons or whatever. But there's no.
But they mostly were trading, it seems, and specifically not settling and mating and you know, integrating themselves into the gene pool, which is, I mean, that is the premise of like Wilson and Blackett or whoever who's saying, you know, well, but we literally descend from Middle Eastern people. As far as we've seen, that is not the case.
So I'm going to go back to the previous slides, just to emphasize the point of like, especially with the Druid thing. So this is another point where, so on the first instance, we've got the Finns. So we've got like an Asiatic people. Okay, they're like racially foreign, at least mainly on the father's side, you know. But they've got this you know, the shamans and this interesting kind of culture that's non-European or whatever. When it comes to the Gauls, I mean, there's going to be cultural influence potentially from Phoenician merchants, maybe. But honestly, it seems like from, again, the genetic evidence that we have, anything that's kind of sort of Germanic or whatever, it's just going to be from the local Neolithic people living in Western Europe. So
Which, fair enough, they already would have had. There's some, because this is the thing that I think we've kind of decided that most people are trying to hone in on when they talk about, like, you know, British Israelites or the Phoenicians or something like that. Well, the Neolithic people of Europe did come from Anatolia. They came from the Near East. Some of their women possibly came from Which one was it? I've forgotten what they're called now. But whichever culture it is in the Levant that was doing pottery at some point.
They're called. That's the Natufian culture you're thinking of. Yeah.
That's it, Natufians. Yeah. But there is like legitimate connection and genetic connection to, well, the Near East at the very least, and probably the Middle East in some degree, maybe laterally, not directly, but so it is there. But it's so much older than most people seem to be talking about. It predates a lot of these ideas of like cultural innovations that might have been brought in by Phoenicians or whatever. I mean, you know, what you're saying, like the Druids as being an autochthonous, indigenous development, when you get steppe herders coming into the pre-established kind of Neolithic way of looking at the world, that seems the most likely explanation to me. I mean, it works, it fits, and you can have your little hints of Middle Eastern elements there if you want.
Yeah. I mean, even like the movements from Anatolia, I'm wanting to make a presentation about this as well. But like even the Western hunter-gatherers, the original sort of European gene pool for the most part, also seems to have come up that way. You know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is the thing. People, unlike some of the ancient stories, people did not just spontaneously sprout out of the ground in Europe. They got here from somewhere, and that place has generally either been the Middle East or Asia, generally. And then a little bit of migration more recently from North Africa, but really, in the long run, not that much, I don't think.
No, not at all. So yeah, but again, it's interesting because I suppose in a lot of cases, again, like a lot of these people that Wilson and Blackett, Michael Tessarian, all these kind of people, it's like looking at the history and noticing these, and we'll come back to this, I'm sure, lots of times in the future, is like why some of these Atlantic people seem to have these interesting kind of similarities with people from the Middle East. Tended to look at it from like a historical basis, which is fair enough. It's like, so okay, well, where can we find this in history? It's like, oh well, there's tales of Skota, the Egyptian princess, like the and like we've got Brutus of Troy and all that kind of stuff. But the genetic evidence is telling us is like that's an Iron Age like context really, or at the very least just post Bronze Age collapse. And it's like there is movement, but it's kind of restricted to the Mediterranean, except for Cadiz. Cadiz the only but again, it's in the very southern tip of Spain.
Exactly. That's just the other. For all practical purposes, that is still the Mediterranean, just about.
Yeah. Now they were obviously sailing up the Atlantic coast, but there's no evidence of really like any genetic input or any significant settlements, north of Cadiz. But again, potential cultural influence coming through this trade is another question. But I think overall, the Phoenician influence is really overstated. And that's
doesn't it come from this? It's the same kind of like classicism thing where we just have to relate our ancestors to people that there are documents about.
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't know why, but we absolutely have. It's got to be. They're either Egyptians or they're Trojans or they're Phoenicians or whatever it is. But and that's great because now we've got the texts from the Greco-Roman period or whenever it was, and we're part of history. Yay!
But to be fair, like they didn't have even like all of the archaeology we have now, back then. So it's like that's helped things. Whereas before that, it's just like, well, who are we? Where do we come from?
Yeah.
We have nothing.
Like, point.
So what do we have? Well, we have history. That's it. So how do we fit into the history or the Bible?
And that's exactly. So with the Bible, and obviously there's Phoenicians in the Bible, there's Romans in the Bible, like So your culture's lore base is this strange Middle Eastern text. It kind of makes sense that you're then going to grow up trying to relate everything back to, well, what were the stories that I was brought up with as a kid, And it wasn't Odin, and it wasn't the Dagda, and it wasn't the native stuff. It was Jesus, and it was Moses and Abraham and all that.
Yeah, pretty much. So just one last note as well. It's like, so this is the general Celtic world. I assume that whoever wrote this has sort of looked at some of the stuff to do with the druids or whatever, and go like, oh, that's some weird foreign shit. It's like
Priests, Connor, they're priests.
Yeah, it's priests, and they have it's present in Britain as well. There were druids in Britain and Ireland, and the explanation given is that even though the Britons were Frisians, they were exiled Frisians, they lacked a Burgd Magd to guide them, and a lamp or holy fire, from which they could commune with Freya. And so it literally says that the Britons were just stupid, and they were then these.
You sure we aren't leaders, kin? Just going on prior depictions.
Yeah. I'll just say as well, like the Phoenicians in the text, they're just like a mix between all three groups, like Lidas, Findas, and Freyas. Just
ultimate mongrel.
Clarify. Yeah, I said that earlier about the Middle Eastern people. Yeah, they're just a mix. So, okay. So, the next part deals with Sigrid's. Oh, forgot to mention as well. Yeah, the whole how Calta fits into the thing with the Gauls. She basically just becomes their queen, and rules over them. And the
hence why they are Celts.
Yeah, they're just named after her. So it's the idea behind the Celts is that they're a mix between I suppose Frisians, which I suppose that accounts for like the Gauls being described as being tall and blonde haired and so on. So like they're a lot like Germanic people, but they've got this weird druid stuff going on that's kind of Phoenician or whatever, and they that's because like these Phoenicians have showed up and they're ruled over by these weird priests called druids. So Caltas, Sigrids, whatever, like loads of people have multiple names in this book. Minerva. She visits Greece. She founds Athens. She civilizes the locals who lived on the slopes of hills. Slope in Frisian is apparently Hellinga. So I'm pretty sure that the Hellenia part of Nehellenia and the Hellinga part of like the slope of the hill, this is Hellenes.
This is why they're Hellenes. Yeah. Okay.
Now, Minerva attempted to abolish slavery among the Greeks as well. So because of course liberty and all that. Just a note on like the Greeks in the Oera Linda book, they're basically Frisians or whatever, but because they're basically on the other side of Europe from Frisia, they are kind of they're and they colonized lots of the Mediterranean. They're described as being kind of like astray from Freya's texts. And they've got a bit of input from Lida and Finda's kin. So, in reality,
being misled over time.
Eh?
Being misled over time.
Yeah. I mean, in reality, in terms of genetics and stuff like that, they're basically Anatolian farmers with a bit of
step herders.
Yamnaya, and then later on, modern Greeks have, especially in the north, a decent amount of Slavic admixture as well. But anyway, it says when Hellenia or Minerva died, the priests, who it implies later on that these priests have come from Egypt. The priests pretended to be with us, and in order to make it appear so, they deified Hellenia. They refused to have any other mother chosen, saying that they feared there was no one among her maidens whom they could trust as they had trusted Minerva. But we would not recognize Minerva as a goddess, just as they wouldn't recognize Woden as a goddess, because Minerva herself had told us that no one could be perfectly good except the spirit of Uralda, or Freya.
Or Freya, yeah.
They gave...
Not Minerva, only Freya.
The priests gave the people statues of her, declaring that they might ask of them whatever they liked as long as they were obedient to her. By these kinds of tales, the stupid people were estranged from us. There's a later passage in the book as well that talks about Athens and says, as long as the ray of Freya's spirit existed, All the building materials were for common use, and no one might build a house larger or better than his neighbours. But when some degenerate townspeople got rich by sea voyages and by the silver that their slaves got in the silver countries, they went to live out in the hills or in the valleys. There, behind high enclosures of trees or walls, they built palaces with costly furniture, and in order to remain in good odour with the nasty priests, they placed their likenesses of false gods and unchaste statues. Such is Athens become, like a morass in a tropical country full of leeches, toads, and poisonous snakes, in which no man of decent habits can set his foot. So, again...
Yeah, man. Degenerate townies.
Yeah, but yeah, very anti-pagan. You know, just all this stuff I've got on the screen here, you know, this Greek paganism, it's, you know, it's like, it's an interesting kind of, it's an interesting kind of thing where it's like, on the one hand, there's this acknowledgement, it's like, oh, Athena or Minerva or whatever is, you know, she, like, there's like a noble sort of truth behind the Greek pantheon, but like its expression in the religion is like, it's priestcraft, you know, it's like, we don't like this ceremonial temples, statues, and just, you know, nonsense kind of thing. So, yeah, as it just says there, the priests, they mislead the local Greeks, and the Frisians have to fortify Athens to protect themselves from them. And this is... some interesting stuff happens after that. So this guy called Kekrops, he's the first king of Athens traditionally, but in the Oera Linda book, he is an Egyptian high priest, and he initially shows up to, you know, help his fellow priests who are besieging the Frisians, and he. Since he can't take the city, he gets the help of the Phoenicians, and the Phoenician sailors are part Frisian because they're sailors, and the Frisians are sailors. So, you know, and for some reason, like the book describes Kekrops very favorably, despite the fact that he's attacking the Frisians. It says this about him. Where is it? From the other Greeks, you will have heard a great deal of bad about Kekrops, because he was not in good repute. But I dare affirm that he was an enlightened man, very renowned both among the inhabitants and among us, for he was against oppression, unlike the other priests, and was virtuous, and knew how to value the wisdom of distant nations. Knowing that, he permitted us to live according to our own Asagaboek law, maybe. There was a story...
Asagaboek. This is Asa something book.
Aye.
Strange.
There was a story current that he was favourable to us because he was the son of a Frisian girl and an Egyptian priest. The reason of this was that he had blue eyes, and that many of our girls had been stolen and sold to Egypt, but he never confirmed this. However it may have been, certain it is that he showed us more friendship than all the other priests together. When he died, his successors soon began to tear up our charters, and gradually to enact so many unsuitable statutes, that at long last nothing remained of liberty but the shadow and the name. So yeah, that's just, I just thought that was kind of weird. They're like, and I don't really know anything about Kekrops. It says like he's portrayed like quite negatively in Greek mythology. I couldn't really find any reference to that. But yeah, and this interesting bit where he convinces the Frisians to leave and they go to Punjab.
As you do.
Yeah. Or they end up there.
Smack bang in the middle of Finnish territory, when they've had all of these troubles with the Finns before, they just, you know...
And I suppose this is the Oera Linda book's explanation for the Indo-Aryans. So,
yeah, of course,
so,
because it wasn't steppe herders that brought, you know, Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita and everything to India. It was Frisians from Greece.
This bit, though, about the Frisian colony in Punjab is very interesting. I'll get to that in a couple of slides. Just a couple of other things to mention here. These are just subsequent events that happen. So, of course, more tying in with the Greek mythology. Odysseus visits Phrygia. And then there's this talks about this figure called Jessos, who's definitely not Jesus, apparently, but he is Krishna and Buddha.
Okay.
And it's just kind of like a tangent later on in the book, and it's kind of just saying it's like, oh, this guy he was born in Kashmir, and he was very wise, and the priests made him into a god, and that's where we get all this degenerate, Hindu and Buddhist nonsense from. So, and then shortly after he's born, it records Denmark is lost to the Finns because the Scandinavians they started trading with the Finns. The mother says no, don't trade with them, they're bad, but they do it anyway, and then they end up kind of they don't have any like they sell all their weapons and they get all this like stuff like jewels and stuff like that, but they don't have any food.
Yeah, that was it, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and so the Scandinavians in this book are portrayed pretty negatively, which is interesting. Yeah. Again, so the idea is like, okay, they're kind of what's the words? Just
So hang on. So far, the Scandinavians, the Brits, the Gauls are portrayed negatively. The Greeks are stupid for various reasons because they didn't believe this or they did believe this other thing. Basically, anybody who's not a Frisian is not a good descendant of Freyr, right?
Or Italian, apparently.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Italians are all right. They're off.
And the Iberians, they're just not mentioned, I don't think. But I'll get to them a bit later on. So there's a catastrophe in 305 BC. I will read a bit about that. Again, it's more this puritanical kind of stuff. The bad time was coming. The bad time did come. Freya had forsaken us. She withheld from us all her watch maidens because monstrous, idolatrous images had been found within our landmarks. And again, that's specifically because of the influence of the Magyars, these Finnish priests, and coming in from Scandinavia. There's stuff about the Magi murders, the Folksmurder, and it says something as well about like many women. So in Frisia, many women and even men talked about ghosts, white women, and gnomes, just like the Denmarkers. So it's like, if whoever wrote this has read about some of the Norse pagan stuff, like they really just were like, no, this is stupid, like superstition, irrational, whatever,
I know better than my distant ancestors.
So it says, continuing, I heard that our Burgmagd had been unchaste, and that some of the Burgheeren had committed treason with the Magi, and many people took their part. Everywhere disputes arose. There were children rebelling against their parents. Good people were secretly murdered. The little old woman who brought everything to light to me was found dead in a ditch. My father, who was a judge, would have her avenged. He was murdered in the night in his own house. 3 years after that, the Magi was master without any resistance. The Saxmen, or Saxons, had remained religious and upright. All the good people fled to them. So the Saxons, they're generally portrayed pretty well as well. Obviously, they're almost the same as Frisians. My mother died of it. I'm not sure what that refers to. Now I did like the others. The Magi prided himself upon his cunning, but Irtha, or the earth, made him know that she would not tolerate any Magi or idol on the holy bosom that had borne Freya. As a wild horse tosses his mane after he has thrown his rider, so Irtha shook her forests and her mountains. Rivers flowed over the land, the sea raged, mountains spouted fire to the clouds, and what they vomited forth, clouds flung upon the earth. At the beginning of the Arnamand, which is harvest month, the earth bowed towards the north and sank down lower and lower. In the Welvermand, winter month, the low-lying lands of Freya's land were buried under the sea. So there's more. This is in 303 BC. We've got, or 305 BC. We've got this like land sinking. So yeah, another one. Which, to be fair, I think that actually did happen quite a lot in that part of the world in these kind of times. So there's it's the Anglo-Saxons, the Utes, they had to flee because of that. Let's see. The woods in which the images were torn up and scattered by the wind. So like nature's literally destroying these horrible Finnish idols that have been set up in Frisia. I'm reading this just because it's so funny.
It has an air of like, and I did the thing, and I went back to my seat, and everybody clapped. You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit of that kind of like, yeah, sure, okay.
The following year, the frost came in the Hardemand, which is January, and laid Friesland concealed under a sheet of ice. In Salamand, February, there were storms of wind from the north, driving mountains of ice and stones. When the spring tides came, the earth raised herself up. The ice melted with the ebb of the forests, with the images drifted out to sea. In May, everyone who dared went home. I came with a maiden to the citadel, Ludgarde. How sad it looked there. The forests of the Linden Urden were almost all gone. When Ludgarde used to be was the sea. The waves swept over the fortifications. Ice had destroyed the tower, and the houses lay heaped over each other. But at least those horrible Finnish pagan idols are gone.
Yeah. It's all worth it in the end,
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, and literally like a year or two later, the Punjabi Frisians show up. Now, this bit's interesting because this is not an invention of the Oera Linda Book. But the Oera Linda Book isn't an invention. It's a lost, forgotten, misunderstood history. But no, it's like apparently this was a thing in the 17th century. That there was a colony of Frisians that settled Punjab, according to this guy Martin Hamkenna.
Right. Okay. I've never heard of this. This is pretty interesting.
This is a thing. Yep. Anybody that's made it this far might find this interesting.
Yeah. I mean, wow. So, I mean, because there's lots of these stories, of course, of everybody sent men to fight alongside Alexander the Great in India. Every single nation in Europe sent people.
Yeah.
But this is the only one I think I can remember, other than some Greeks maybe, of people supposedly returning from India.
Yeah. Just where this story came from in the first place is just...
Yeah.
I
mean, the one thing that we can say, this isn't something that we've been able to sort of identify after the publication of the Oera Linda book that wasn't known or suspected or suggested before. This is something that obviously, this Martin Hamkenna has, for whatever reason, come out with the story, and whoever's ended up putting the Oera Linda book together, I mean, we're running with the idea, I think, that it's probably not a legitimate document, is aware of this, and has kind of like shoehorned it in somehow.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about it, it's like this. So Martin Hamkenna was Frisian, and it's just like, well, this is just our history, It's like, of course, King Friso was existed, It's like,
Why would we be called Frisians if there weren't a King Friso?
Well, I suppose it's
the
fun.
Britons are named after Brutus of Troy, obviously.
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, that's. Despite this, though, he's portrayed pretty negatively in the Oera Linda book. I suppose
he's been corrupted by all the ways of Finder's brood.
Yep. But he's this is, I suppose, the point where, like, there's not really matriarchs anymore. This is maybe like the era of kings. So this is sort of like the end of the 4th century BC, and they're now getting this guy Friso, and it's like he's crafty. He tricks people. He likes being a pirate. But
sounds like an all right bloke.
Yeah, he's good at his job. He's a good king.
Yeah,
he can keep the enemies at bay, and he can win back lost lands. So,
useful. Yeah,
especially with the Gauls. Bloody French. So yeah, what does? Oh, hang on. There we go. So yeah, and that's that's more or less the story, you know. And I just wanted to get on to like what it says about some of the other peoples. So we'll start with the Twisklanders, which are specifically Germans, including the Franks and the Alemanni, but not the Saxons, because the Saxons are mentioned separately. And they're apparently descended from Frisian exiles, a lot like the Britons, but they've stolen women from the Tatars, and the Tatars are, you know, they're just warlike, bloodthirsty barbarians that we don't like because they're Asian. And that's why the Franks and Alemanni are really warlike and aggressive and, you know, kind of crap despite being German.
But not the Saxons. The Saxons are not warlike or aggressive.
Well, I'll read you what it says about the Saxons. The Saxons have left the cultivation of the soil to the women. The not 1 in 100 can read or write. From this it comes too that not one has a motto on his shield, but only a misshapen form of some animal that he's killed. Oh, so ghastly and barbaric. And
sounds very pagan.
Yeah. And lastly, from this comes also that they are very warlike. So
okay.
But sometimes...
So the reason so the Saxons have not miscegenated with Tatar women, but they're still warlike because they gave the farming over to the women and they forgot how to read and write.
I could be wrong, actually. Maybe the Saxons are considered Twisklanders as well. I don't know. Like, there was an earlier part where they were considered. Like,
not very clear, is it?
Yeah, I can't. I might
not.
It's
not because obviously it's not Germany. It's like it's sort of non-lowland Germany, isn't it? Because it seems like the Frisians are supposed to have lived in those bits of, you know, the northern bit of Germany around where Frisia is.
Yeah.
So the Saxons are around there, more or less. They're just a little bit further in. I would assume that if they're talking Franks and Alemanni and Twisklanders, that's going to be people who are more in actual, like, inland Germany.
Yeah,
right?
They're the hill Germans, basically. The upland Germans.
Yeah, the hill Germans.
Yeah. So... Oh, hang on. No, sorry. It does specify. It says the Saxons are sometimes as stupid as the beasts that they catch, and as poor as the Twisklanders with whom they go to war.
They're not Twisklanders. Okay.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it talks about the Saxons earlier on. It says, oh, they were still very religious and upright. But I think this is a later part of the text where it's saying, oh no, they're just stupid. So I don't know if it's implying that they've degenerated in some way, or maybe it's just I don't know. But it's interesting, that specific note about the Saxons have left the cultivation of the soil to the women. That looks like it's pulled straight out of Germania by Tacitus. Yeah. Because it seems as if... I'll get into the ideals in this, but it's like, it's very much like, you know, no, you Frisian man, you till the soil. You know, this is what it means to be a good Frisian. It's like, you're a farmer. Don't be a warrior. Just, you know, fight your life away. You know, all this kind of nonsense. It's like, you know, you fight.
Farmer or a sailor. It's exactly. You are a fighting man, but your main thing is provision. I guess is the idea, not defense or offense. So
defense, but not offense.
Yeah. Well, actually, you're right. It is specifically not offense because it's in their laws early on in the book where they're basically like, don't instigate shit.
Yeah. Like, defend
yourself if you have to, but if you're aggressing against somebody else, that's a contravention of their laws.
Yeah.
It's kind of badass in its way. Yeah. It's also just sort of there's a lot of room there for that to actually completely hobble a people, because sometimes you need such a thing as a preemptive attack. I mean, just throwing that out there.
Sure. A couple of the other peoples, there's this people called the Marsatin, and I can't find any reference to them outside the Oera Linda book. And it says, above the Rhine among the mountains, I have seen Marsatin. The Marsatin are people who live on the lakes. Their houses are built upon piles for protection from the wild beasts and wicked people. There are wolves, bears, and horrible lions.
As opposed to the really nice lions.
Then come the Swiss, the nearest to the frontiers of all of the distant Italians, the followers of Calta and the savage Twiskar, all greedy for robbery and booty. I think that's implying that the Italians are greedy for robbery and booty, as well as the Germans. I'm not completely sure. But it says the Marsatin gain their livelihood by fishing and hunting. The skins are sewn together by the women and prepared with birch bark. The small skins are as soft as a woman's skin. The Burgmarkt at Friesburg, or modern-day Freiburg, told us that they were good, simple people, but if I had not heard her speak of them first, I should have thought that they were not free as people. They looked so impudent. There's a couple of things to mention about this people. Yeah, pile dwellings in the Alps, that's a thing. So there's not many references to archaeology in the Oera Linda book. It's mostly history, but this is the one thing where it's like, I don't think that historical texts talk about these, but it's definitely a thing. Like, they were lived in until about 500 BC. So
when was the first point at which archaeologists had clocked that there were alpine pile dwellings then? Was it before 1867?
I don't know. It might have been. I didn't get...
Right. Because this is one of the things. Because Oera Linda Book, there's a lot of stuff that we've already gone through that seems suspect at best. But then there's a few little things here and there, like the Asiaticness of Finns. That they had no way of proving that back then, but now we know that is a legitimate thing. The sinking of Doggerland, if that is what's being referenced, they had no way of knowing that back then, but, well, that seems to have been borne out. There's just little bits here and there where it's like, is this a legitimate tradition that's just been sort of heavily co-opted and distorted for contemporary purposes, or is this like ancestral memory or something? I mean, I might mention this if we go on and do a bit more of a broader discussion later. I've got a few ideas about what's going on in that regard.
Okay. But the other thing as well is like, so these people are portrayed as like hunters and fishers, and it's not particularly positive. It's like, oh, they look a bit impudent. It's like, so I suppose again, the ideal hunter gatherers, I don't think isn't necessarily the ideal in the Oera Linda book. So
no, they like settled farmers and fishers, it seems.
I mean, there's not even that much references to fishing as such, like sailing.
They have all this stuff to do with so it's like sea kings, right? I always have that put me in mind not only of like people trading. I mean, obviously they're not raiding, so what are you going to need squads of boats for?
Fair enough. Yeah.
Fishing ventures. That's what I thought. That was what I thought.
Yeah.
It was like,
so they're fishers and they're farmers. That's basically, that's the Frisian ideal.
Settled people, very firmly settled people, and that area as well, the Netherlands. I mean, we were discussing this briefly in the last one. Back in the Mesolithic, it did seem like it was quite a sedentary culture around there. Yeah. At a certain point, they were just fishing off the coast because why not? It's lush. Everything you need is right there, and the temperature probably was better back then. It probably was a little bit like what some earlier parts of the Oera Linda book describe it as being, like paradisical, if that's the word.
Yeah, it's just they would have still had pretty harsh winters, although maybe not as harsh as at later points. So, see, the Romans. It talks about, well, they're portrayed in a kind of at arm's length in a way. So it's talking about like Lida's people were slaves of the Phoenicians. Let's see. These people, the Phoenicians and the Romans, are struggling constantly for the supremacy over the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans, moreover, live at enmity with the Venetians, and their priests, who wish to assume the sole government of the world, cannot bear the sight of the Gauls. I'm pretty sure that refers to the Roman priests. So
sounds like it.
So first they took from the Phoenicians Marseille, then all the countries lying to the south, the west and the north, as well as the southern part of Britain, and they have always driven away the Phoenician priests, that is, the Gauls, of whom thousands have sought refuge in North Britain. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know, is that supposed... What's weird about this is like the Frisians are kind of first mentioned in Roman texts. The earliest reference is 12 BC. This, the Roman invasion of Britain, that was like 43 AD. Like, we'll not count Julius Caesar, because he just invaded, but he didn't actually get anything. But like,
I came, I saw, I conquered, but only for the weekend.
Yeah. But the what do you call it? The actual like takeover of southern Britain. This is in the 40s AD. So it's a bit interesting that they never reference the Romans as enemies. So who lives in the north part of Britain? Well, it says in the north part of Britain there exists a Scotch people. The most of them spring from Freya's blood. Some of them are descended from the followers of Calta, and for the rest, from Britons and fugitives who gradually, in the course of time, took refuge there from the tin mines. Those who come from the tin mines have wives, either altogether foreign or of foreign descent. They are all under the dominion of the Gauls. Their arms are wooden bows and arrows pointed with stag's horn or flint. Their houses are of turf and straw, and some of them live in caves in the mountains. Sheep that they have stolen form their only wealth. Sheep, Alex. Fucking great Irish Gaelic epic, The Sheep Raid of Cooley.
I know, it's sort of you could, well, I mean, you probably could be a bit more ignorant of Britain and Ireland. If you tried.
I think of all of the pointers that this text was written in the 19th century, it's like, apologist for this book. Anybody watching this who thinks the Oera Linda is legit, like, you have to know nothing about Gaelic, culture in Scotland or whatever, to think that these people valued sheep that much. The only reason that there's so many sheep in Scotland is because they cleared most of the Highland Gaelic people from the Highlands and replaced them with sheep. Before that, the Gaels, the Highlanders, the original Scots, they were all about their cattle. That was,
Indo-European as fuck. Gaels, Scots.
If it's, if it said cattle, it's like, but it doesn't. It says sheep. So this book was written in the 19th century. So just
that's a really good. That's a good. You clocked that really well.
Literally, it's like, no, come on, because that's when sheep became ubiquitous in Scotland. It was in the 19th century because they cleared the Highlanders. So this cannot date before the 19th century. Yeah. It's like, I shouldn't have to say that, but it's the fact that there is.
Yeah, you do, because I know, but it is a point that people will not know readily. People who haven't been born here, but haven't been brought up here, but even most people who are born and bred in England probably don't know much at all about Highland clearances.
Yeah.
So they can get taken in by that as well. And think, well, of course, Celts and sheep. I remember hearing about the Welsh and sheep. It must just be a thing. The Scots and sheep, the Irish and sheep. Sure, why not? Cattle Raid of Cooley, where's that?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, just for the sake of completion, some of these other people, how they are portrayed. So it says of the Slavs, in the olden times, the Slavonic race knew nothing of liberty. They were brought under the yoke like oxen. They were driven into the bowels of the earth to dig metals and had to build houses of stone as dwelling places for princes and priests. The princes are proud and warlike. There is therefore some virtue in their hearts. They consulted together and bestowed some of their superfluity, but the cowardly, hypocritical priests could not suffer this. Among their false gods, they had invented also wicked, cruel monsters. Pestilence broke out in the country, and they said that the gods were angry with the domineering of the wicked. Then the boldest of the people were strangled in their chains. The earth drank their blood, and the blood produced corn and fruits that inspired with wisdom those who ate them.
Okay.
That's kind of weird. But that's an interesting point about the Slavs, I suppose. Just I don't know.
Are they meant to be Freya's kin or Finder's kin?
There's probably supposed to be a mix. I don't think it says specifically.
It sounds like they so something about they were born without liberty or whatever. Well, that kind of suggests that they can't have been Freya's kin, because Freya's all about that liberty. It's all about liberty.
Yeah, but I suppose it's maybe implying that they're born without liberty because they're ruled over by these priests. And if it's in Eastern Europe, then they're probably.
But they're ruled over by priests. That's what the Magi are. So they must be. It must be Magyars or something.
Yep. Because Slavs, Finns, it's all Eastern Europe.
Yeah, they're all the same, aren't they? Look at that map. They've all got East Asian admixture, haven't they?
To be fair though, it does specify that this guy, whoever wrote this, he seems to have liked the Slavic nobility though. He was like, nah, these are my niggas.
Awesome.
And that's the point at which the algorithm will kill.
Anyway, we've now destroyed our stream forever. Fantastic. I like it.
But I couldn't put it any other way. It's like,
oh no, yeah.
But yeah, so Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, to be fair, there is like this theme among a lot of like Western people when they look at Russia specifically, and they definitely get this sense of them being like kind of not free. You know, when you think about like the autocracy of you know the last
depictions
Tsars.
of like serf life in Slavic countries are generally pretty horrific.
Which,
you know,
to be fair, I don't think that's because of like this is like a racial characteristic of the Slavs.
No.
I mean, it's like they had serfdom later than Western Europe. Like Western Europe, serfdom was kind of introduced in the Middle Ages kind of time. Serfdom in Russia, that came about only really after the Middle Ages. So you know they're just a bit backwards.
I think also there's a tendency. I mean, maybe this is just me, my reading, but I think Slavs like to dwell on some of the darker and more gruesome stuff in ways that other Europeans don't. And also for other Europeans that do like some kind of like, you know, British humor, Irish humor is pretty dark a lot of the time, but it's different. The character's a bit different. And I think that's a thing that like a Frisian might look at that and think, oh God, like they were really heavily oppressed over there. That's not, and if you're coming at it from this like, you know, liberty über alles mindset, which seems to underscore most of the Oera Linda book, then yeah, you're going to be looking at that and thinking like, Slavs, don't know about that. Princes seem cool because they're absolutely mental half the time. But yeah, just blame the priests.
Yeah, as always. Yeah, moving on, just the last couple of peoples. The Iranians are not savages, but good people who neither pray to nor tolerate images. Neither will they suffer priests or churches.
Oh, right, because they're Zoroastrians.
Yeah.
Mate, the Zoroastrians, their priests are literally called Magi.
Yeah, I know. Just...
Wow, fuck. Okay, so just plumb got that one wrong then.
Yep. There
You're
is
right
something...
on the aniconism. They don't have a depiction of God, but still.
Well, the kind of... Later on, they kind of develop them, but yeah, they generally would avoid it, and this is something we can go into.
Isn't their symbol is more? They have this thing called the Fravashi, which is like a winged vehicle for the soul or something like that.
Yeah.
But God then is just like light and rays of light of the Amesha Spenters. Am I right about any of this?
Yeah.
So the rays of light, they're like guardian angels, and that's what's represented, but it implies God. Anyway, yeah. Moving on.
Yeah. The Hindus, on the other hand, it does mention about the Iranians. They maintain the holy fire, so that they're like us. That's good. Of course. Yeah. The Hindus, on the other hand,
we totally didn't rip that idea off from them, by the way, says Oera Linda Book.
Yeah. But yeah, the Hindus, on the other hand, are timid and submissive before their princes, like hinds before wolves. And of course, it's like, oh, hinds, you know, Hindus. Yeah. Therefore, the Iran and the others have called them Hindus, which means hinds. But their timidity is frightfully abused. If strangers come to purchase corn, everything is turned into money. And this is not prevented by the priests, because they, being more crafty and rapacious than all the princes put together, know very well that all the money will come into their pockets. So again, this theme of like, whoever wrote this looks at Hinduism. It's priest-ridden. It's really woo. It's, you know, those magical kind of that jumble of nonsense. These people suck. They look at the Zoroastrians like holy fire, very abstract kind of principles kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, I like that. So there's definitely like there's a theme with like the type of spiritual preferences in this book compared to that more kind of, I would just would describe it more as, what would you describe as like this kind of like really kind of ceremonial like kind of
what, like the Magyar are supposed to have, where it's all like rituals and gold and temples and incense and blah blah blah, as opposed to more austere worship. I don't know if I'd have like a one size fits all word for it, but it is just kind of like there's more pageantry. In Hinduism, they have these huge like floats with gods, deities on them, chariots being pulled round the corners and the breakneck speeds. threatening to destroy buildings and stuff. Big light ceremonies, color ceremonies, it's fires, it's offerings every day, all these colorful things. It's like it's a pageant.
Yeah.
When you have the more austere, sit in a cell and think on God kind of stuff, which you get in Hinduism, and you get like extraordinary austerity in Hinduism. I think Hinduism is just very extreme in terms of the different kinds of religiosity that it caters to or allows for. But when you're thinking more like Protestantism, Puritanism, see, this is the thing that I've noted. It's taking the sense of ritual purity to some kind of logical conclusion, which is not to say that Hindus don't have notions of ritual purity. They absolutely do. Why do they have a caste system? Because, ritual purity, basically, and Brahmins should not touch certain people or they will lose some of their purity, right? That's why you have untouchables. So it's not like these cultures are missing some of these elements or have extra elements. It's that the way that they're being applied is different, and the kind of like the gravitas is weighted differently. In the Puritan mindset, it's almost less to do with what you touch or what you eat or stuff like that, and it's much more with what you think and how you think it and how you're approaching people and everything. But it's still this like clamp down, and I've got to basically mitigate my sinful nature. Hinduism has that in some sects, but it's also got an awful lot of sinful nature. The hell are you talking about? Nature's not sinful.
Yeah.
Nature is nature. Let nature be nature. Don't worry too much about it, and then let's see how things go. Which, in my view, and that is that's the pagan way of doing things, where you're not abstracting so much from human life, I guess, where you're trying to make the Puritan ideal ends up, and this applies not just in Christianity, but in almost any religion that has Puritanism, this obsession with a particular kind of ritual purity. You are sexless, no fun in many ways. You don't drink, you don't take drugs or whatever. Parties are probably religious. It's all you're trying to make all of your life and every second of your life about vows, I would say, to God about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, as opposed to a more laissez-faire approach where you're going to let God let you know what kind of stuff you need to be focusing on by how your day goes, I guess. Right? I don't know. That's like one way that I've thought to kind of distinguish between these two.
Yeah. Different religions do seem to veer more towards one or the other. One religion that strikes me as being a bit more on the sort of puritanical side is Sikhism, in the sense that well, first of all, it's actually the monotheism polytheism thing actually features pretty strongly as like a difference between these kind of emphases. The monotheistic religions really do seem to be more puritanical in this sense. They're sort of like, no, there's one God. Keep the focus simple. It's like, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. All of this ritual and superstition and stuff like that. It's like, that's mostly nonsense. It's like, just focus on God, that kind of thing. So yeah.
It's funny because you're saying that. I'm thinking like, why would that be the case? I think it's something to do with when you've got a culture or a religion that accepts multiple deities. Then when you encounter somebody who's not living like you, who does things differently, you're not as much about that, hey, you're doing it wrong. You're just like, oh, that's how you do it. And they're like, yes, I see how you do it. It's very interesting, It makes sense that our gods would be related to each other like this because you do things this way and I do things this way. And it's sort of, I kind of think that's smarter in the long run, but it might not be as good for things like social cohesion. Right, so if you've got periods of lots of extended warfare, for example, and you've got cultures that are trying to hold together despite lots of difficulty, changing circumstances, maybe catastrophes, calamities, maybe natural disasters or famines or whatever it could be, maybe then it makes sense to try and pull everybody under one deity. I don't know. And then there's also the argument that, well, if you're a philosopher or some kind of mystic or something, and you go to the nth degree in your pursuit of truth, whether theoretically, logically, or experientially, you're inevitably going to end up hitting upon some concept of fundamental unity. And if you're then talking to people about religious stuff, you're probably going to try and express that, and you're probably going to try and get people to, even if they don't worship like the same God, you're going to try and emphasize that, well, your image of God, how you see God and how you over there see God, you're seeing the same force, the same power from different perspectives. And that's right, because you're built differently. You have different purposes. So it's right for you to be in your religion. It's right for you to be in your religion. But please, let's not fight each other so much. Let's try and see, where are we actually the same, and where can we allow for each other? Where can we allow each other's differences? To me, that just seems like a smarter way forward in general. And that is why I would say that Hinduism, when we call it Hinduism, there is no religion called Hinduism. That's a misnomer. But the Dharmic faiths in general, and I could even restrict that and not include, people disagree as to whether Buddhism is Dharmic and whether Jainism is Dharmic. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. If you're just talking about what people call Hinduism, well, it's survived as long as it has done and has had so many rebirths almost, with all like the Chaitanya movement, Shankara, all these figures that have come up to revivify it from within. That is because of its sort of religious pluralism, its ability to accept multiple different perspectives. Whereas whenever you have anything like that happening in Christianity, for example, you have a schism and you have conflict, which doesn't seem like it's quite as functional in the long term, right?
Yeah.
Not that there's not conflict in Hinduism, obviously there is, but as a sort of prevailing movement, I would say that schism in Christianity has probably hurt Christianity as a whole over time, whereas schism in Hinduism has kind of helped it over time. It's given it more limbs to sustain itself with.
Yeah. One thing, though, that I would disagree that Hinduism is not one thing. I think there is one thing that does unite Hinduism as a belief system, and that would be the Vedas. It seems
that's fair enough, yeah.
Anybody...
That's what it's supposed to be about. And then people disagree about who's actually according to the Vedas properly or not. And there's various groups, tribal groups especially, that are called Dharmic or Hindus, or they follow Sanatana Dharma or whatever. But they don't do the Vedas, for example. They don't have any Brahmins, but they're still called Hindus.
Okay.
I get you, though. I get you. There is that Vedic substratum. That should be the basis of why Hinduism is a Dharmic religion and why Buddhism is not a Dharmic religion. But then people disagree about this because of what Dharma is supposed to mean. So
yeah. Okay. So I suppose actually that's a good segue into the next slide. Just to give an idea of more of the things that whoever wrote this likes. So did you know the Frisians invented writing?
Oh, I did. After reading the Oera Linda Book, I kind of clocked it. When I saw, in fact, that page that you've got an image of there, which I think comes from the manuscript, where they show you how to do all the little characters, I suddenly realized, of course, this is the root of Greek and Phoenician writing. The Greeks and Phoenicians got it from the Frisians. Of course they did.
So it's this six-spoked wheel. You can draw it with a compass kind of thing. It might have some relation to this thing I've got at the bottom. This is called a hex sign. And they're known from the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Pennsylvania Dutch are actually German, but they're from a part of Germany which forms like a dialect continuum with the Netherlands. That's maybe why they're called Dutch. But
Plattdeutsch.
No, it's
not Plattdeutsch.
No, Franconian, Frankish.
Okay. I'm never going to get my head around Germany ever.
No, honestly, man, it's the German language that it's. How it relates to other Germanic languages, it is confusing as hell, so I don't blame you. But point being, like, I thought it might have something to do with this, because some people think that these hex signs, some people are like, oh, well, they're not really known from before the 19th century, but other people are like, no, this is like a pagan symbol or something like that. So just throwing out the possibility there that this, the Oera Linda Book, like this six... spoked wheel thing that's used for the basis of the writing system could potentially have some basis in Dutch sort of folk tradition, even though the Pennsylvania Dutch aren't actually Dutch, but you get what I mean. It's like there might be something there. The point being that, like, yeah, whoever wrote this is really into like reading, writing. So I get the sense of like a bookworm, probably something of a philosopher. There's a lot, so much of the spiritual stuff. We've kind of only touched on it with what we were just talking about, but definitely this very kind of lofty, abstract, philosophical approach.
I'll tell you.
to the
I'll
world.
say it's very capital R romantic in the sense of being kind of a bit pantheistic, a bit panentheistic, just a bit. In the sense Uralda as being a sort of unmanifest principle that just exists, and by whose mere existence the beginning came about, and then time, and then earth, and then good things and bad things, and then three daughters or whatever. Yeah, it's got lofty aspirations, definitely.
Yeah. So because of this, there's this guy, a king called Black Adel. He's the fourth king after Friezo was king, and he's features in the last chapter of the Oera Linda book. And he was like, just let the women and the philosophers they can read, but the men should be like fighting and stuff like that. And this is kind of portrayed as a bad thing. It's like. Yeah. So it's interesting this
That's a bad thing.
it's interesting this ideal of like men should be farmers and literate, like readers. They should know how to read, and they should know how to till the soil or sail and fish and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of bourgeois, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a kind of even like a townie, imagining what a country life could be like, I suppose.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, we've got to. I don't know, because I've got a couple of theories that I've read now about what was actually going on with the whole circumstances of this text coming into the public eye. We'll get onto that at some point.
Okay. Yeah, I knew we're gonna have to do this again sometime. Perhaps you could put together something on the Oera.
We've been going for nearly 2.5 hours already.
Yeah. So like
time's completely run away from me. Shit.
I know.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. Like
take them in chunks. You don't have to put yourself through an entire one of our presentations in one sitting, unless you're up to the Iron Man challenge. Then you can try.
Oh man. How should I? Just let me see. Let's just try and like finish this off a bit, because I suppose both of us are getting the sense that it's like, yeah, we're pretty much done here.
I'm getting kind of hungry as well.
Yeah, me too. I did have some quotes of the laws and stuff like that.
But this is good stuff to get into because despite all of the strange, historically questionable stuff in the contents of the text, it actually has some interesting moral and social sort of recommendations, I guess.
Yeah, stuff like like you said, not allowed to attack other people. So it's I'm not going to read the full quotes at this point, but it's basically death penalty if you commit robbery, murder, arson, rape, or any other crime upon a neighboring state. And yeah, it also emphasizes that Frisian boys should learn how to use weapons. And stuff to do with after serving as a warrior for 3 years, he may become a citizen, and then he has a vote in the election of the headman. No king may be in office for more than 3 years. So it's a lot of this kind of stuff. It's like very democratic kind of thing. But
quite advanced, one might say.
Yeah,
2000 BC.
It says as well, like if we should be ill-treated in a foreign market, whether distant or near, we must immediately attack them. For we desire to be at peace. For though we desire to be at peace, we must not let our neighbours underrate us or think we are afraid. So this seems to be the only... Again, it is defense.
This is preemptive.
Yeah.
This is self-defense, like ahead of the event. Yeah.
And that seems to be the only case in which it's allowed to attack other people, is if they attack you first. You're not allowed to just go like, They have some stuff that I want. Let me just come up with some, pretext for like why I could go and raid them and take their stuff.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
to be fair, I mean, you read like the sagas and stuff like that. It's like a lot of the time that is the case. It's just like no,
Yeah.
you just want somebody else's stuff or their women
Yeah.
or just whatever, and you just go and take it.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But from the Oera Linda Book's perspective, that's a moral degeneration that's typically influenced by racially foreign people.
Definitely, and it all came to a head when Black Adel stopped everybody from reading and writing and made them all fight all the time. They lost all of their morals and started. It's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah. Talks about all freeborn men are equal. So, equality.
Unless they are Lyda's children or
There shall-
Finda's children.
There shall be no usurers in the market. And you're only allowed to have like a house on a piece of land, and you only get to have like an enclosure in front of your house if you've done something for the public. So it's like it's very democratic. You could almost consider it socialist.
Yeah, you could. It gets towards that. I mean, except for it being kind of managed by essentially a theocracy with the Berg maidens and the Folk Mother, but it is kind of socialist in terms of how it's arranged.
Yeah. So it's a socialist matriarchy. It's like quite interesting. It's quite interesting the sort of people that this book appeals to.
It is. It's very interesting that socialist matriarchy should appeal so strongly to certain demographics.
Yeah. Boggles me. Anyway, like, but I mean, it says like, as well, if the water is disturbed, it becomes troubled, uneven, but it always has a tendency to return to its tranquil condition. That is its nature, just as the inclination towards justice and freedom exists in Freya's children. We derive this disposition from the spirit of our father, Uralda, which speaks strongly in Freya's children and will eternally remain so. Eternity is another symbol of Uralda, who remains always just and unchangeable. So, despite the fact that, you have some characters like Kalta, who just is a bit...
They're poor examples of Freya's. They're like what you shouldn't be like.
Yeah. So it's like they're not perfect, but it's Freya specifically, out of the 3 women that were created, that was chosen by gods, and her people are the chosen people, and they're not all good, but generally it's their nature to be good, whereas it's generally the nature of Finda's folk to be bad or evil, and it's generally the nature of Lyda's folk to just be kind of Raj. I don't know.
Yeah. Or yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that's more or less.
That's kind of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the contrast between this very sort of isolationist thing. It's like, this is our nature, and if you there's tons of warnings throughout. It's like, oh, don't mix with the Asians or the blacks or whatever. It's like they'll corrupt your morals and that kind of thing. Despite the fact that because the Frisians are sailors, they do a lot of exploring. Because it's like, oh, I want to know. It's like you're curious, and it's like, oh, I want to know what's over there, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, 9 times out of 10, there's people over there, and you better hope that they're not cannibals, of course.
So yeah, that's basically it. I don't know if we want to crack open this question at the end at this point.
I mean, we've touched on it a little bit. Okay, off the top of my head, very quickly: racial purity, moral purity, a sense of like an anciently established indigenous right to this territory and to ways of life that have been gifted us, not out of nature, disgusting growing nature. No, by God. God himself, in the abstract form, has created female Jesus, who's had some children. Right, and if we just got to follow our natural God-given inclinations and be our own good selves and not mix with other people's at all, and then we'll be grand. We'll be great. Why is that so appealing to certain kind of person?
I suppose it's just because it's like
It's comfortable. It's comfy, and it gives you
Well.
a purpose. And it's like, to me at least, it's like, oh, I can see it with some of these people I'm maybe going to start talking to a little bit about this stuff. Like, to them, it just gives them context, and a really, to them, solid context it's spiritual, it's realistic in terms of it being based in real world events and not Christianity or something. I don't know. Yeah, it gives them a sense of who they are that is just better than it's more interesting and more inspiring than the kind of standard narrative that is offered.
Yeah, I think that's probably what it is just that it's kind of countercultural in a way. Like,
yeah,
it's the kind of values. It's basically the opposite from what are prevailing.
It's very anti-modern. That's one thing that can be said about it is it's against things like, okay, I think industrialization, which as we consider the likely creators of the Oera Linda book would have witnessed the downsides of industrialization, and they probably would have thought, well, this is imposition to such a great degree on individual and communal freedoms. There's something inherently wrong with what is happening in this modernization effort. So they make this big, long kind of narrative story about ancient, timeless traditions that are, divinely inspired or whatever. I can see it. I can see it as being a reaction against a significant amount of change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. I think as well, to be quite honest, in terms of like the sort of people that this appeals to nowadays, again, it's like with everybody that we talked about in the last thing. It's this thing of like, the mainstream is lying to us, and we are the special elite who know like the truth. Like, this is the true history, and because I think specifically because of the moral emphasis in it as well, and it's like the moral emphasis stands in such contrast to our mainstream society, that it's like that's kind of seen as like, no, this must be true because it speaks to truth, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I do see what you mean. I do see, and there is it is a fact that sort of academic history and archaeology has tended over time to demoralize in the sense of not kind of opining as much on morality, not saying as much about should and should not, and just dealing mostly with, well, it seems as if this is the case, or was the case, or whatever. Yeah. Whereas people are wanting these ancient kinds of, epic national stories, Kalevala, right? Some people have got this kind of stuff where, oh, look, this story gives us a sense in a condensed book form of what it means to be actually Finnish and not a Finn from the Oera Linda book. The Frisians don't have this, right?
Yeah.
But they can create something. Somebody can create something like the Oera Linda book, and I will actually, if you don't mind, shall I finish off giving this? I can't remember what his name is, Otema or somebody. Somebody's come up with a pretty interesting theory about what actually happened in the creation of this text. Right. So you were talking about, is it Cornelius Oberdelinde?
Yeah.
Right. And he supposedly was the guy who inherited this text from. I think his aunt, it had been his grandfather's, and so on and so forth. And right now, he was working with somebody called Vervies, I think.
Yeah, Vervies is the one that Oberdelinde gave the text to, because Vervies was a librarian, I think.
Yes, and there was one other person involved who was, if I'm not mistaken, a Protestant preacher, actually some decades younger than Cornelius Oberdelinde. Anyway, the theory goes that the Oera Linda book was originally intended to be a pastiche of the Bible, and it was meant to poke fun at contemporary Frisian ethno-nationalists. Their original plan was to construct this thing, and and it's meant to kind of make fun of biblical literalism as well. And so the structures of the Bible were incorporated, and they made it really actually kind of absurd and extreme in terms of unilaterally condemning certain races, let's say, in certain ways, and praising others. But it seems almost farcical in some readings. And it was unleashed onto the public. And over time, the kinds of disagreements that experts were having over it, which were like philological disagreements about the etymology of words, and whether this was a legitimate Old Frisian or whether there were anachronisms in the text, or and what material was the paper and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They kind of realized over time that like they were never going to get the opportunity to pull the rug out from under the nationalists and the hardline Christians' feet, because those weren't the guys that were eating it up and really getting into it. The people that were getting into it were like linguists. So they felt really kind of like, this is just a theory. Nobody thinks that this is absolutely what happened, but the theory is, over time, they just kind of like pulled away from it a little bit, like, well, we'll leave that then. Shit. Prank's sort of gone wrong.
I mean, I think it's just, the thing that boggles me actually about the Oera Linda book is just, if this has just been made up, which it looks like it is, just the amount of effort that's gone into it.
It's astonishing. Well, this is the thing, because this Protestant preacher, I think he's known as a poet and quite a I guess like a mystical-ish poet. People say that he is, and he's kind of a romantic, right? Capital R romantic. So I can well see somebody like that, who's kind of young, who's a preacher, who deals with that kind of stuff, grappling in himself with spiritual kind of realities, I guess, using this as an exercise to try and work some stuff out or communicate some ideas. And then you've got an older bloke and a guy who's in between them. One of them is an expert in this and the other guy whatever. I can see it as being like, yes, you'd put that much effort in over some years maybe. I mean, they were only in touch with each other briefly, like a year and a half. They all lived in the same kind of area, and then they would have had to have been corresponding by letters subsequently. But I think they were friends, all of these three characters, for a good number of years, and it's long enough for people to have put down this kind of project. And then, you give it out to Favis, and then he gives it out to Sandbach. I can't remember. There's other linguists that looked at it, and the first lot said no, and then another lot said actually maybe, and that's kind of where it went from there.
Okay.
But it's quite a serious bit of effort, isn't it? And if it blows up in your face like that, you're expecting a load of lunatics to start kind of running through the streets with print copies of this saying, this is the truth, we found it, and then you're going to pull it out in national news and you're going to destroy the nationalists. That's the idea. That was what it was about. And it had completely the other effect. It actually went into supporting Nazism.
Yeah.
Like, fuck. That's the polar opposite effect. That was the original idea. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep. So I think that's a good point to end there.
I think it is. That, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Oera Linda book, at least as far as we're going to be dealing with it for now. If people want more on the Oera Linda book, please keep it to yourselves. No, let us know. And we'll see if we can work out, going back into it a little bit more. The Oera Linda book is going to become like Ireland, Connor. Connor and I have got a thing about Ireland. We don't like going to Ireland. Ireland's too confusing. Whether you're talking genetics, mythology, history, it doesn't matter. Ireland is too confusing. So we used to have this thing that, no, Connor, don't take me back to Ireland. Don't take me back to the Oera Linda book.
Yeah.
Right.
Ireland. Yeah. That's not what the next presentation is going to be.
It's not. I was horrified to think that you were about to tell me that I was going to have to do a presentation on Ireland.
I'll do one. I'll do one someday.
Yeah. Well. Oh God. If you want to do one on Ireland someday, be my guest. Good God. When are we doing the next one? Because you're now off until the end of the month, aren't you?
Yeah, to Ireland.
You're going to fucking Ireland. Right. Well, on that topical note, yeah. So we're going to be back. Is it the Wednesday that you're back? 29th?
No. It's in June. It's the 5th of June. I'm coming back. So
you're coming back in June, right? So it's going to be you're coming back on the 5th.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to have quite a long break then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a bit
out of the
wonky
way right now, and then we've got a month's wait until the next one. Near enough.
Yeah.
12th, Wednesday the 12th then?
Okay. Yeah, we can.
Or would you be happy to do one on the 5th, on the day you come back?
No. But,
No, I thought so.
A day or two after, we can do something like that, because that's the idea. Is like I'm going away, so in the meantime,
Right.
you can
It's
put
just I'm
together.
also thinking about I've got things on weekends at various points through June. Shall we say for now Wednesday the 12th, and then I'll get in touch with you if it looks like we could do an earlier one, say on like the 9th or something.
Okay, sure.
Cool. All right. Sorry, everybody, you're getting to witness our internal discussions and how we arrange things on the fly.
Well,
extremely organized.
We're trying to have it every couple of weeks.
Yeah, that would be the ideal.
Because of my trip, it's obviously had to be. This presentation has come a little bit earlier than it would have routinely, but
that's all right. I said semi-regular, I think, to the group on Facebook, so they'll all be all right. It's only everybody else that doesn't know about this yet that's going to get confused. Right. Shall we leave that there then?
Yeah. I hope that all of you at home enjoyed this presentation. I hope you learned something interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. The operative word.
Yeah. And just, I mean, for anyone at this stage that's listening to this and is still kind of believing that the Oera Linda book is an authentic piece of history, it's like, I'm not gonna say that you shouldn't believe that, but like, trust us.
It's a lot of room for severe doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, more than and I mean, this is you and I, Connor, and we have challenged standard narratives quite firmly, and I mean, even for my part, quite aggressively in the past. And we've actually had a little bit of success here and there where we've had intuitions that have just proven right. Not necessarily our own intuitions wholesale, but like about the Anglo-Saxon migrations, for example. And we, for quite a while, were thinking like this probably wasn't a massive invasion with, a whole populace massacred. And lo and behold, the genetic evidence came out and it wasn't. And it was sort of like, so there's little bits here and there where, yeah, you can challenge the standard narrative a little bit that way or a little bit that way, and you might actually win. But when you're saying that the whole thing is wrong, and we've actually got to start from this really spurious bit of sort of partially unfalsifiable and partially actually just abjectly wrong information, like the Oera Linda book, then I mean, we've tried with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. You get so far, and then beyond that point, the real world evidence just keeps mounting up, and you've got nothing to sort of, you can't work with that anymore. You're stuck on this text that requires certain things to be the case that aren't the case.
Yeah. So, but it's still there's something to
it's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's definitely inspiration. You can definitely get inspiration from this. I wouldn't want people to get inspired into thinking that blacks are stupid and angry and yellow people are sort of conniving and terribly prone to getting dominated by priests or something like. But if it inspires you to love your people and to love your land and to have respect for the spirit in things, then I think that's really good. And you should hold that in a special place in yourself. The fact that people can be inspired like that by a text like this, which as far as we're concerned is not even real, I think that's quite potent and quite I think that says a lot about the potential in humanity, as much the potential for that potential to be misused, as in Nazis or something, as for it to be used in a better way, like some of the New Age groups that came off the back of literally believing in the Oera Linda book are not evil.
Yeah.
They are very isolationist, want to be left alone to live according to what they see as the original indigenous European life way. Fair play to them. Let them go and do that, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't believe in it, but I don't have to.
Right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for listening. And yeah, we will see you again next time.
Catch you in the next one. See you, folks.
Bye.